Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. God, it's going to be a good one. Before we get into today's episode, which is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, let's talk about the brand that makes this podcast possible. Black Rifle Coffee. We're heading over to the website, right meow, and I knew it was going to happen at some point. We have flipped over solidly into Christmas shopping. So right there on the front banner, free shipping, whatever it may be, on orders over $30 or more. And then on the bottom, what do we got here? We got the last minute gift card ideas, always a classic, 30 to 70% off. And then an extra 10% off for the ID.me customers. That's my understanding. That's a verified identification process for government workers. This video, Jingle Shells, is hilarious. If you didn't know you could make music with suppressed weapons, well, there you go. Now you do. And what do we got here? Get a free gift. Don't settle for one. Buy 2 coffee products and choose a free gift. So everything is Christmas related, as it should be, because let's click over here real fast onto the calendar. Man, 2.5 weeks left in 2024. I have some awesome stuff lined up for 2025. And let me see here. We got one Friday, 2 Friday. Next Friday, the 27th, I'll kind of go into the changes for the podcast for 2025 and beyond. All of them are great. I'm going to update the format a little bit. By that, I mean advertising reads, what's going to be there, what's not going to be there, new brands I might be working with. Don't worry, Black Rifle's not going anywhere. Love those guys. It's going to be awesome, but I'll get into that on the 27th. My guest today reached out to me, Shane Claytor. I'm going to go ahead and read his bio right off my phone here because I don't want to miss anything. Navy Corpsman, Iraq War vet, 2006-2007, ICU nurse, newly minted MBA grad, worked at the VA off and on for 8 years to include COVID. Worked at the VA when COVID began, was disciplined for speaking out, worked as a travel nurse at 6 different hospitals, various hospital systems. Passionate about getting the word out to change the VA healthcare system. Now working as a business consultant, hooking veterans, disabled veteran nonprofit, and developing an app to help families and loved ones make decisions during the hospitalization process and the end-of-life decision making. Shane can speak pretty deeply about what goes on at the VA, and I will let him speak for himself as to what he saw, what he experienced, and what he thinks of the system, and what he thinks can be done to improve care for veterans, especially around end of life. I don't even know what episode it is, but whatever episode it is, enjoy it with Shane Claytor.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
Well, what led you to the military to begin with?
I was 31 when I joined the military. I was wild when I was younger, kind of in and out of church, pretty wild.
Started going to church?
In and out of church, yeah. I grew up in church, went to a Christian school, kind of fell into drugs in my mid-20s.
What was your drug of choice?
You name it. Started to get kind of into the ecstasy thing.
I don't have any experience with that.
A little bit of marijuana. Yeah, it's probably a good thing that you don't have experience with that.
Is that what they call Molly? Is that the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now. It was, honestly, for me, it was short-lived. I was just kind of, just going full bore with it, so.
What, I've never been a religious person.
Yeah.
So I can't speak onto the guidelines of what religions usually don't want you to do, but I feel like ecstasy falls outside of the window.
Yeah, it's not the best thing, yeah.
Just curious what led you down that path.
Not the best thing.
Yeah, what led you there?
To be honest, I grew up, my dad was a corpsman in Vietnam, left us when I was a little kid. Great, good dude, on and off drugs most of his life. My stepdad married my mom when I was 5. Great dude. They became really strong Christians when I was 7 or 8. Changed their whole lives. I mean, the whole family changed around. Both of them started going to church. Kind of cleared up our whole family. A lot of drama, with mixed kind of family. And,
How'd they find it?
How'd they find it?
Yeah.
To be honest, my sister got baptized. My stepsister, and she had a really rough time. It was really a cool family. My dad left when I was a kid, kind of on and off drugs, like I said. Her mom was an alcoholic. So both families kind of got left alone, and my mom and dad came together like that. And then she kind of had a rough time with her mom. Her mom died really young of alcoholism after that. And then she just got baptized, became a Christian, and got baptized. My mom and dad were having a rough time. They were about to break up. You know, we were there. I think my dad had 3 kids. My mom had 2. And then they went to the baptism, and it was like immediate. They said, you know what? This is where we're headed. And the both of them kind of became Christians through that. Our family was very involved in church after that, and that kind of was where we started. So for me, I was like the perfect church kid, I would say, like a kind of the all-American boy, you know. And my real dad, my biological dad, was wild. He off and on drugs, like I said, most of his life. I was 18 or 19. He came home and he had HIV, you know, just from the way he lived. And we're talking back in the day when HIV was HIV.
Yeah.
You know, it was 1992.
What was the life expectancy back then if you got diagnosed with
It was
that?
short. Yeah.
Yeah.
He lived maybe 4 years after that.
Fuck.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would have said I was a Christian back then. And, but I definitely, I look back and I wasn't living it even then. It was just all a show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when he died, I kind of, you know, I was looking at forgiveness, and I had really been bitter at him for a lot of stuff that had gone on, and I said, you know, he's dying, I need to forgive him and do this, and he just died in like a horrible way. Died of a drug overdose. He was at a party, and they just threw his body out in the street because nobody wanted to get in trouble. And so I went, kind of dealt with that. Me and my brother. My brother had gotten married really early. We kind of took 2 different directions with that. My brother always had a girlfriend, always had to be with someone. I was kind of I was a really friendly kid, had a lot of fun with people, but I was kind of a loner deep down. Like I didn't date a lot. I was more alone with that kind of stuff. But so my brother went one direction. After that, I kind of went off the deep end. My attitude was like, well, what's the point, you know, and forgiveness. And if that's the end result of someone's life, then all the stuff I had learned at church didn't mean anything. So
How old were you at the time?
19. Yeah.
Were you able to reconnect with your dad at all before he passed?
I did. Yeah. I actually, my brother and I kind of have different experiences. My dad, when I was born, he was on and off, you know, in and out of drug rehab, kind of had all those problems. And my
Sounds
brother,
like heavier drugs.
heavy drugs. Yeah. He was actually, the crazy thing is he was a nurse. But
Nurses have access to some good shit.
they do, and back then especially. yeah, no, for real. Back then especially, because
I felt like
didn't
the checks
monitor
and
it.
balances now. I mean, I have one data point for being in a hospital for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
Which I learned a few things. One, it's impossible to get good sleep.
Yeah.
Because every 2 hours they come in and they say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And the answer is, "I was doing fucking great until 15 seconds
Were you in
ago."
an ICU?
For a little bit, right before I went into
those
surgery.
That's the worst. Man.
Even
That's
the post-surgical wing.
Yeah, it's brutal. Yeah.
And I was appreciative of all the stuff they were giving me, but it was like barcoding everything.
Yeah.
I feel like it would be a lot harder to hide the little scrape you're taking off the top for yourself.
Nowadays, yeah, because everything's scanned. You have to be slick. And a lot of them now, what they do is they go to hospice and they start emptying syringes from a bag. That's how they do it now. Yeah. My first day in a VA as a nurse, I got there and FBI and all these police were there, and it was a Marine, and he overdosed on and he had gone to hospice and was taking it from the bags, you know, and he was given an IV in the bathroom, overdosed.
So I'm a fan of Netflix documentaries.
Yeah.
The genres that I prefer, I feel like it's safe to say, horrifies my wife.
Right.
Because, like, she's out of town right now. And I watched the entire Rajneeshi Wild Wild Country 1 to 6.
Right.
Not the first time I've watched it. And she called me and asked me what I was doing. I'm like, I'm watching the Rajneeshi. She's just like, why? What's wrong with you? It's fascinating. But the other genre that I love are nurses killing people.
Yeah.
And how they
it's
do
dark.
it.
Yeah,
Holy
it's dark.
shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've been an ICU nurse for the last 8 years. The crazy thing is my dad didn't raise me. I wanted nothing to do with him. I definitely didn't want to be like him. I used to cry when I was a kid, and my mom would tell me, "Oh, you're just like your dad, and it scares me, blah, blah, blah." 31, I joined the military, become a Navy Corpsman, go to combat just like he did in Vietnam, and then get out and become a nurse just like he did. So that stuff's in your genes, nothing you can do about it. And now it doesn't bother me at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just that it's the life I've had. It's cool. You know, that was the gift that I was given, I guess. And,
Yeah.
you know, nothing wrong with it, but yeah. But as far as your question, as you had asked about how I joined the military, I started going back to church in my 20s after kind of, you know, dealing with the drugs, and started to kind of try and like fix my life, I guess, morally, like, all right, I got to get back into this.
Did it help?
It did. Yeah. I mean, I would say I definitely wasn't on and off drugs as much. You know,
Yeah.
I definitely wasn't doing drugs, but did it help as far as did I stop? Was I a Christian? Did I give my life over to it? And I would say no.
Okay.
But what happened was there was a couple guys that came into my life. One guy was a World War II vet. And he was in Japan. I forget where he was in Japan, but I mean, the dude was a stud. You know, he was had hidden from the Japanese for 3 or 4 days, you know, listened to worms, you know, eat some of the soldiers that he had killed, hiding out. I mean, the dude was a stud. And then he came out and was a thief for years. You know, his mid-30s, just had this radical transformation. Became
Like a jewel
strong
thief? We
Christian.
talking Ocean's 11 shit?
Everything. Yeah, everything. You name
Yes.
it. Yeah, because he was dark. You know what I mean? He had a kind of a dark background, and a lot of stuff went on in the military. So he just got out and kind of used that to, I guess, to his advantage. But he had a testimony, like he just it clicked with him like that, and just poured into the church. And the dude was like, you'd hear a pastor preach, and this guy would get up. Never was a pastor, nothing like that. But I mean, he could quote the Bible like nobody I've ever heard, and just verse after verse. I mean, the dude was brilliant. You know what I mean? Just a cool dude. He died right before I joined the military. But the other guy that he was kind of like mentoring or discipling, he was the son of a Korean War. What's the Korean War pilots? The famous Korean War pilots.
You're talking like the Tuskegee Airmen?
Close, but it's not the Tuskegee Airmen. I'll have to think about it. But anyways, he was the son of one of those guys. He always wanted to be a chaplain in the military.
Are you talking about like the Doolittle Raiders?
Sort of. It's not that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it.
Those are the only two I know off the top of my head.
Yeah. It's the Korean War, famous
Yeah.
Korean War pilots from, they were in China for a while, but his dad was one of them. His dad was a mess too, but this guy kind of had a similar testimony as you know, the World War II guy, kind of had a radical transformation. He always wanted to be a chaplain, became a chaplain, and he really wanted to go to Iraq and serve as a chaplain. So he was kind of in my life. I really loved the dude, really good dude. He helped me land a really good job, like kind of after, you know, I was on and off drugs. I was actually a surgical sales rep, doing really well.
Prior to the military.
Right before the military, yeah.
Okay.
And you know, in LA and California, I had landed. I'm from California. I had landed what I thought was like my dream job, and started doing it. I just wasn't very happy. The war in Iraq was going on. We actually him and I met a kid at the church who had just got back from Afghanistan, and the kid was a mess. Like he was a corpsman, had gone to Afghanistan, kind of the kind of kid you people would pick on. You know, you could just tell. Kid had been raped, you know, by Marines, had a real rough time. And so we were kind of helping him, but I don't know, whatever really hit me just dealing with the kid. I said, you know, what have I ever done, man? I've been selfish. I was on and off drugs, doing this or that. And I just woke up one day, I didn't call anybody, and I just went and signed up. Went home, told my mom, hey, I'm leaving. You know, she hit my dad, my stepdad, said, I told you he was going to do this as soon as this war kicked off, that he was going to leave and do this. So,
What year did you enlist?
2005.
How'd you answer the drug questions?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
We'll leave it at
no.
that. We'll leave it at that.
I can tell you I scored like perfect on the ASVAB, and they came out and asked me about the SEALs. And I was like, I don't think I want to do the background thing. I'm not sure I
You're
can.
probably better off to be a SEAL with a lower ASVAB score, to be honest.
Well, I had a really good ASVAB. They were asking that, or
Probably nuclear submarines.
nuclear sub.
Yeah.
That's what they really asked me, to be a nuke. And I said, no, all of it, I just wasn't comfortable. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to,
Did you ever
especially
interface?
at my age.
Did you ever interface with submariners while you were in the Navy?
I did. I actually lived with a dude when I first got out of the military. He was a submariner. He was a trip. He was an interesting dude.
They glow white.
Yeah.
I did 30 days on a submarine, way pre 9/11.
Yeah.
Based out of Guam, just doing MSLO, MSLI, so mass swimmer lockout, mass swimmer lock in at the dry deck shelter.
Yeah.
And then I was going to say we're like driving around in Guam. I don't know where the fuck we were.
Yeah.
It's not like I was up there being consulted on the navigational charts, but they surfaced it, and they just did a swim call in the middle of the ocean. And here's a reference I don't think you'll ever get, Michael. Have you ever seen the movie Powder?
No.
You've never seen Powder?
No.
Oh, that's a great movie.
I try to
Especially
throw every
nowadays,
movie.
That's a great. You got to watch that, Michael. That's a great movie.
You can name
man.
almost any movie.
That's a great movie.
Oh, sorry, I haven't seen it.
Just to help me make this point, do me a favor and just Google Powder the movie and go ahead and pull up
Michael
the.
could be Powder if he shaved everything.
Well,
off, really.
yeah, and he was the color of that shirt. Pull up the cover art for the old Powder movie, and this will help. Yeah, so this is what a
There you go.
Submariner looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not too far off. I mean, my old roommate's gonna kill me for saying this. He was a cool dude.
No, I was gonna say
actually,
some of the coolest people ever. Their
Yeah.
job just doesn't involve a lot of vitamin D.
No.
And when
not
they
a lot
came
of
out for that
people
swim
either.
call, about 100 of those came out.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Highlights
yeah.
the point, doesn't it, Michael?
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. He was an interesting, smartest guy I've ever been around in my life. He was a smart dude.
They don't take a lot of idiots down
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. You know what he does now? He writes the instructions for rockets.
Really?
Yeah. For Pratt Whitney out in Florida. So he's the guy that, I mean, you talk about meticulous. He used to drive me crazy because I'm the exact opposite. And I mean meticulous to the bone, where I'm like, dude, you got to stop, But that's his background, that's his life. I'm a very sharp dude. So yeah, very sharp guy.
So let me see here. Probably boot camp, and then what do they just send you to? Corman A school?
Yeah, I went to A school in Lejeune right away, and then I wanted. Well, Lejeune A school was in Chicago area.
Okay,
Great
right there in
Lakes.
the Great Lakes.
Yeah, and then right from there, I wanted to be with the Marines. I didn't, I wanted to go overseas. I wanted to do all that. I didn't really. For me, that was why I did it at an older age.
So did you go down the FMF pipeline then?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I went right out of A school, I went to FMF in Lejeune, yeah, which was a good time. I mean, I had a good time in FMF school. It was fun.
And for people listening, excuse me, the Marine Corps doesn't have their own corpsman. So they pull from
don't.
the Navy.
They do.
And they call the Navy Corpsman attached to the Marine Corps FMF Corman. So
Yep.
people can understand what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
and I've heard you talk about why that is, and I think I have an answer for you that you probably haven't heard.
Let's hear it. I have heard a variety of
So,
answers, none of them
yeah.
from somebody who's responsible for any doctrine. So
Yeah, I don't know about doctrine, but I know, like, in reality, I think it helps to separate the branches because you got to, like, I've had to give officers STD checks or, like, master gunnery sergeant, stick a a cotton swab in his penis because he thinks he has an STD, or in Iraq had a colonel crying because he had sent some guys off and they end up dying from his decision. I think it helps to separate the two. That would be maybe why. And then the Marine Corps doesn't. You know how the Marine Corps is. They want warriors. I actually think it's great to have a separation because you got to really stand up to those guys sometimes because they can brutalize the guys. And you, even as a E3, I had to say, hey, you can't do this. Like, you got to let this guy. You got to either send this guy home, let him go. You got to drop it. Like, he's hurt. He's legitimately hurt. So I think some of that is helpful, but I don't know if that's doctrine. But in my experience, I do think it's helpful to separate the branches because you really do have to stand up to those guys sometimes, or else they're gonna hurt their guys.
they're a unique and special breed.
Marines?
Yeah.
Oh, I love Marines. I've got stories for
I love
days
them
about
too.
Marines. Yeah.
Their esprit de corps and camaraderie and love of their service is, to me, from what I've seen, so the data point only counts for one, it exceeds all other branches.
I totally agree. I mean, I worked for the VA the last 7 years actually 8 years off and on, and they keep that with them in their 90s. And I can smell a Marine from a mile away. I'm talking about the real Marines, the hardcore guys.
Yep.
They don't ever lose it. Even if they were in 4 years, they don't lose that Marine feel. I mean, they just keep that with them their whole lives. It's wild.
So A school, or boot camp, A school, FMF course, and then how does that work? You get attached to a unit in the Marine Corps?
Yeah. I kind of had a choice. I was naive. I didn't. My dad was a corpsman. My uncle was a recon. My uncle was actually first recon unit in the military. in Vietnam. He became a homicide detective, had kind of a cool story himself, but I didn't know much about that. I didn't know my uncle really too well growing up because of my real dad. You know, we were more bonded with my stepdad. But yeah, I chose the other, like you had division side, which is like the, you know, the front runners, the frontline Marines, and then you had the I don't know I don't even remember what you call them now, but basically my envision was like MASH. You know, I wanted to be in a hospital working with injured guys coming in and out. That's what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. So I went with a 7th ESB, so an engineering support battalion. We had obviously EOD with us, so we were losing a lot of guys with EOD, you know, when I was over there. But yeah, I went over to Camp Pendleton right after that. With a ESB, you know, with a 7th ESB unit. So,
and then where'd you deploy?
Iraq. I was in Fallujah in 2006, 2007. I had a wild experience. I mean, I joined the military, went FMF right away, Camp Pendleton. I was there for a day, and some senior chief sat with me and said, "Oh, you know, you're going to go to Iraq in about a year." I said, all right, you know, I had never dealt with patients before. I mean, I always had a medical brain. Mm-hmm. I worked for a big biotech company and did pretty well before the military. And then, like I said, I was doing surgical sales.
Even in A school and in the pipeline, you guys didn't have any patient interface?
You do. No, you don't do. You do a lot of it's all on each other. I mean, you tear each other up with IVs, all your shots. You can tell where someone's in A school.
Yeah, based on
by their arms. Yeah, their arms are all bruised up. And then you can tell how far along they are because they get less bruises. You get better at it, you know. But yeah, that's kind of. You guys would have done
rounds or something like that. I know they do.
No,
that
you would think
doctors.
You do mild. Like I did some mild rounds in a surgery center, but it was like at a VA. You know, it was very mild. And you really don't. Yeah, you would think you would do that, but not at all. It's really when I was in, they were testing out that it was all done. That the computer it was all online. So we had guys that were instructors, but a lot of your day-to-day sessions were just online. It was really wild. So, and they ended up ending that within a couple years because it wasn't a good setup. So I know they lost a lot of guys, or just they felt like guys weren't being proficient when they got out. So yeah.
All right, so you're over at Camp Pendleton. I know there's a couple hospitals there. My sister actually worked at one, the one that was deep inside of Camp Pendleton for years.
Yeah,
actually, she worked there.
They just rebuilt that. Yeah.
Yeah, but closer to the gate, right? Like this crazy. You can see it from the freeway.
Yeah, the new one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the new one's gorgeous.
She worked there for a while
it's
too.
Gorgeous. Yeah. She a corpsman or a nurse? Or?
She was a nurse practitioner. She's a civilian,
nice.
And then she also does hospice as well.
Yeah.
So she bounces back and forth between helping people try to stay out of the grave and then easing the transition into the grave.
Oh yeah.
I tell you what, I don't know how people do hospice, man.
Hospice is rough. My mom's we tease my mom because she was a secretary for hospice for a long time, and she loves it. She thinks it's the greatest thing in the world because she doesn't like to see people suffer. My grandmother suffered like brutally in a hospital for a long time before she went, and she was kind of wired like that, scared to death of death, and man, she went out clawing, you know. And my mom, it always bothered my mom, bothered all of us really, but you know, she's a big believer in hospice, so we always tease her that, you know, she's going to get a freaking, you know, broken toe and she's going to hospice. Or, Mom, no, you're not
it's
there
my
yet.
Time.
Yeah.
It's not your time. You just hit your head.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of the family joke. But I actually think hospice is a good thing, but it's heavy, you know, a lot of death. I mean, ICU is kind of like that, but ICU is, you know, some people make it out of there. But
what percentage of people don't make it out of the ICU?
Well, it depends on where we're at. VA?
Yes.
Probably a lower percentage, and there's reasons for that. The VA, so the VA doesn't like to let people go, where most places, I'm sure we'll get into that later, but most hospitals have like ethics committees that will get involved if a patient's basically rotting and there's just no hope.
Are we talking like brain dead but still alive?
Yeah, like maybe intubated, on life support. The VA will allow those guys to sit there for a long time. And the reason is, I mean, there's a lot of reasons in my opinion. And I actually think it's not just opinion. I mean, most people would say the same thing. The VA is really worried about public sentiment. Like they don't, you know, so they're more worried about the community hearing that we're not taking care of guys or that they gave up on a guy in the hospital. So guys will sit and just rot, because they don't want to.
And probably have the same end state anyway.
No, almost all the time. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of life support for a long time. Most ICU nurses aren't. I mean, it's a dark road. I would say in all the years, people have come out of obviously being intubated and on life support, but usually they're younger. They were likely, after surgery, things like that. Very few of them come out when it's an emergency and you absolutely have to do it. I mean, even CPR.
What does it work less than 5% of the time?
Yeah. It's like
it's not like the movies.
No,
live and they spit out.
No,
well,
not at
probably
all.
The Heimlich
No,
when
it's
they're
actually
spitting
kind
out
of dark. You break their chest, and
For
sometimes
people who've never been around CPR,
oh yeah, it's dark.
I don't think they realize you're going to break almost every bone in their sternum.
I mean, the first time I ever did it on a guy in a VA was an older guy, and I didn't even want to touch the guy, but I had to.
Yeah.
And I did it. The guy was like 83, and it literally was just like, brrr. I mean, I broke every bone in his sternum, and then he was just spewing blood from his mouth, from his nose, from his ears, because it just, I just shattered everything in there, and it's dark,
Didn't they change the CPR protocol? It used to be 15 and 2, and now it's
30 to 2. Now.
30 to 2. Yeah. So it's mostly about the compressions versus the.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is real CPR is probably like anything else. I mean, you just kind of get in there and get it done. 30 to 2 is in the hospital. It's kind of a machine. I honestly, you just start, everyone kind of fills their roles.
Yeah, they just get after
When I'm doing it, I just start doing compressions and let everyone else tell me when to stop, and so that they can, because it's just an easier way to go. Yeah,
hook that
exactly.
fucker up.
Yeah. Well, the AED and the backboard. Backboard's a big one too.
It's unfortunate that the AED doesn't have an override switch, because we used to hook each other up to that thing. I'm not saying this is smart. And it would non-shockable rhythm.
Did you shock yourself?
Hypothetically.
Right. Well, I got a story about that. So.
Hypothetically, we might have been testing out on the new guys.
Really?
It didn't go off, but I'm not going to say it didn't go off because we weren't trying to get it to go off. It didn't go off because it had embedded safety protocols that we couldn't figure out our way around, which is probably to the benefit of the person who may have been taped to a spine board with no consent for us to be playing the games.
This is in the teams, or
it's hard to say.
Yeah, I'm tracking. That's you can
non-shockable rhythm.
Yeah, you can actually, you use an AED to get these guys out of a funky rhythm, but it does the opposite if you're healthy.
I think it can kill you for sure.
Rhythm. Yeah, I have a story about that. When I was in nursing school, we had one, and I still blame the VA. It was their fault. Like, it said training. It said training AED. So if I see training AED, that's a training AED.
You would think it would be inert.
That's what I would think.
To the degree to be able to deliver a shot.
And I'm the oldest guy by far in my group. The other ones are probably 21, 22. I think by then I was like 35. And I said, it's got to be inert. Let's try it out. So they put it on me, and we had it all the way up to about 180, which might have killed me, or definitely would have thrown me into a lifelong messed up rhythm. And I got it down to like 10. And I said, just go for it. And we pushed in. And it was like someone crawled in my chest and grabbed my heart, and it was brutal. I mean, to this day, I probably lost. I probably lost 5 years from that. My dad, my stepdad had surgery and woke up being shocked, and it messed him up mentally for a long time. So yeah, it wasn't the smartest. It wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done. I'll just say that.
It is, man, it's wild to be around people who are getting shocked.
Yeah.
Not that I've been around it a touch, but I've been around it enough. And yeah, it's a sight to behold for sure.
I mean, it's kind of fun to watch too, because they do kind of, jerk. It's not fun when it's not going anywhere. And a lot of times it doesn't go anywhere,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times you're just kind of cycling through. I think you're right. It's 5% actually make it out of a hospital and live after CPR. And a lot of those times it's pretty ideal patients.
Yeah.
I think it's 75 to 80% survive, but then they have to be intubated, and they're a mess. And within 7 or 8 days they pass away after that. So
yeah, the intubation doesn't really tend to have a long-term great output, does it?
No, I mean when you get intubated, your body's you're obviously not breathing on your own, and I mean the long term effects of that are rough on your body. I think it's every day you're intubated, the recovery's like 7. So you get guys that are intubated for 2 or 3 months. Your recovery's like a year.
Weren't they? And I don't want to be wrong about this, so correct me if I am. But I swear, when COVID first kicked off, weren't they putting people on respirators
Early.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and the VA was one of the big ones. Some of it was, I have a different opinion probably than a lot of other people with that stuff.
And I'm not saying they're trying to hurt anybody. I do believe they're trying
to
to
do bad policy, I think.
Well, I think they were trying to do the best that they could, but I wonder if they let the person know, hey, for every day you're on this, it's a 7x recovery.
No. I'm actually, the funny thing is I mean, this has nothing to do with this because I can't really talk about it too much, but I'm actually trying to develop an app to help people make that decision.
Like an informed consent?
Yeah. As I've seen so much into life. A lot of times things are emergency, or, obviously people probably should have been thinking about that ahead of time, what their decisions are going to be.
Yeah.
And they don't, and then they end up in a bad spot. And a lot of times they're intubated and the family members really wish they hadn't.
I was going to say, it not only puts them in a bad spot, but then you put this decision onto somebody else.
Exactly. My last patient in the VA before I left in September. It's my favorite patient I ever had. The guy didn't want to be intubated, didn't want to be trached, and had it all. And then, his poor brother was left with the decision. And it took him about 7 or 8 months to make the decision. It was just rough, man. I mean, the guy just suffered.
7 or 8 months?
7 or 8 months, yeah. Tracheostomy, which he didn't want.
So how are you allowed to do it to somebody if they don't want it to be done?
Well, that's a long story. I mean, I guess we might as well get into it now.
Yeah, we can bounce around as we need to.
Yeah.
But I thought if you had that, essentially a living will.
Well, that's some of the issues at the VA that hopefully I'm sure we'll talk about. So this guy came in. He was paralyzed from the waist down, had one leg, and his had an infection on his right leg. Well, there was no leg there. So he had an infection so bad in his right hip, it was all the way to the bone. I mean, you could see exposed bone, and just it literally looked like a giant hamburger patty. You could see the outline of the hip bone.
How did he get to that point?
He was at home, I think, and just not being taken care of. I mean, when you're not moving around like that, you're in bed all the time, especially paralyzed guy. You got to really get after it as far as moving them around, having them in the right bed.
How did he get paralyzed? Is what?
He got in a car accident when he was younger.
Okay.
He was older, maybe close to 70, and he got out of the military. And at some point, he got in a car accident. Got paralyzed from the waist down, and then lost his leg. He got an infection before that and lost his leg. But what happened with him was he came into us, in the ICU. He was having difficulty breathing. This was just like maybe a year ago. And so we started working with him. I loved the guy. Him and I got along right away. And he had when he got in that car accident, he had a brain injury as well. So he was all there. He was just hyperverbal. That doesn't mean, a lot of medical people, especially nurses, are really bad about it. Just not listening to a guy and saying, oh, he's crazy, he's this or that. And you sit and listen to a lot of guys. They might talk to, I mean, you would know this from the military, guys that have had brain injuries. They're all there sometimes. The pathways just aren't as quick to connect, so that sometimes
you go on a fantastic journey along the way to get to the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I do that myself. What does Trump call that? The weave, I think, is what he...
I think he did call it that.
Yeah.
I don't think he even knows what he's talking about himself when he says that, but whatever.
No, I don't think it's the most effective way to communicate, but
let's just call it it is, not answering the question.
Yeah. I mean, or going way off.
Yeah.
I mean, we all do it, but I don't think it's every time he said that, I'm like, I don't think that's the most effective way to answer the question.
Yeah, at all.
Whatever you want to say.
Let's not promote the weave.
Yeah. But this guy was all there, and he came in. He was kind of at the end of his road. You know what I mean? Didn't really want any medical care anymore. He had a history of suicidal ideation, which, makes sense. I mean, the guy's been paralyzed for like 20 years, been in and out of the hospital. You really wanted to stay in the hospital because he felt like he was cared for better. And when he got to us, he didn't want to, he didn't want to be intubated. He didn't want to be trached, especially. And, as he's talking to me, And the big thing, I used to fight for these guys a lot because I was a lot of the VA hospitals I worked at 3 different VA hospitals. A lot of times I was one of the only veterans in the day shifts. And I'm just a big believer in you got to honor guys' wishes.
For the VA to honor the wish, does it have to be more than just verbalized? Do you have to document this
yes.
to writing?
And I have a crazy story about this guy it's brutal actually. So he came in and he wanted to be a DNR, which is do not resuscitate.
Yes, I also want to be that.
Right, and I want to be that now.
My
and
dad
I don't
doesn't
have that,
know that he is that because I wrote it down for him.
Yeah. No, I think it's the right way to go. I mean, unless you're young and have some traumatic thing, and you can always change it, the majority of the time, I'm a big believer in do not resuscitate because especially the end of life is brutal after you resuscitate someone. It's just a brutal. I think I heard a thing on something like 90% of the medical bills happen in the last 3 weeks of life, and it's because of being intubated, life support, the intensity of all the stuff that they have to go through.
I mean, all joking aside, my dad is not DNR yet. I'll get that paperwork done when I get power of attorney. But I used to have very direct conversations with the guys that I worked with, and it was pretty clear. Like if I step on an IED and I'm dual or triple above the knee, let me go. Yeah. And you'd actually have to sit down because at first, guys are joking because it's like, gallows humor, like, no, dude.
No, I'm serious. Yeah,
I'm fucking serious. And eventually it would get to, you would kind of sit around and talk with the guys about where to fight and where to let it go.
Oh, yeah.
And not the easiest conversation to have.
Yeah.
And I was never put into a place where I had to actually take the action on the words for somebody like that. But I was glad to know where they stood. And I legitimately wanted people to understand, like if I'm in pieces, fucking let me go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I told my mom that before I left, my mom and my dad, I signed the same thing, DNR.
Yeah.
And I told them I don't even want to be on a respirator. I don't want any of it. And they were, all in tears. And my aunt, I think, busted out some joke about not having legs or it wasn't the best timing, and I was like,
well,
I don't want any of it, I respect a lot of the guys that go through that.
Think about it too. So hard to have that conversation with your family.
Yeah.
Imagine though you being in that place where you can't communicate and now they're having to try to figure out what the fuck to do.
Exactly.
That to me feels like it would be harder.
Exactly. And that's part of why I want to develop an app. I've seen that so much. It's a lot of it is people don't want to face death and they don't want to face the truth. And you have to think of that stuff ahead of time. Like what you're doing now is the way to do that with your mom, your dad, or your loved ones. You have to do that early because by the time you get there, all the emotion, and I've seen it happen all the time where people say, I don't want them intubated, I don't want them on life support, and then the event happens.
And they want it.
And now they want it all because they're scared to death to let go. And then, a lot of times that patient suffers. Sometimes they make it out of there, but the majority of times they don't when it gets to that point. But yeah, this guy though, so what happened was with him, he kept saying he wanted to be a DNR to me one day, and they were working on that for a long time. And I came in and said, all right, he needs to be a DNR. Like, we need to make him a DNR. This guy's asking for that. They had already traked him, which he really didn't want. Mm-hmm. But he allowed his brother talk him into it, which, I understand that. I respect that. If he made the decision, his brother leaned on him. The doctors sometimes tell him that there's going to be hope. That's their decision. But I came in and started talking to him, and he said, he was still pretty verbal even through the trach. And he told me, I want to be a DNR. And I was happy for him. I said, all right, let me do the work and get this done, and I go talk to, I had to call a psych doc, and then all the other doctors got involved. And I left. I was gone. I think I went to Europe for a week or something for school. And I come back, and the dude's not a DNR. He's still full resuscitation. And I'm like, what happened? The dude, he clearly, and I asked him, why do you want to be a DNR? And clearly he said, I don't have movement from the waist down. I have a wound that's never going to heal, which is true. And I'm never getting out of this place. Like, I'm never getting out of this situation is what he said to me.
Yeah.
to me, that makes sense. So some psych doctor at the VA came and evaluated him and said he's not capable of making that decision himself, which to me is criminal. That's disgusting. And the reason he did that is
Why
because
would you rob somebody of that agency?
he's got a history of suicidal ideation. So he said, "Oh, that's not suicide. That's a clear decision from a man who you know what I mean, who made that decision himself." So I was disgusted by that kind of stuff. And you see that sometimes in the hospital. The easy decision is to make a decision like that, is the doctor says, "Oh, well, hey, I'm just going on his history. I'm protecting him." But it's crap. I mean, it's trash. It's absolutely trash.
Who becomes responsible for the potential suffering of that person post that decision?
Exactly. I mean, I know who should be responsible for it. Is all
I mean,
of them in the
I
system.
know who I would like to make responsible.
No,
However, there's no
100%.
legal way to do so.
100%. And it didn't even end there with that guy. So that happens. And then I come in one day. I usually work days, and I came in at night to fill in. And I was doing travel nursing at this point in Miami. And I come in, and the guy wanted to be DNR again, and I guess they approved it, right? So I'm there at night. Same guy.
Yep.
So I'm there at night, and I'm happy for the guy. I'm like, sweet, let's do this. Well, I look in the system, and he's not a DNR. And I run around. I go find a doctor. It's a night doctor. She's a resident. So residents are, they're not student doctors. They're full doctors, but they're new, and they're usually rotating through. It's her last day in the ICU. She doesn't want to be there, and she doesn't want to do her job. So I go in and tell her, hey, you need to put this in the system. This guy has been fighting for this for like 6 months now. You need to make him a DNR. She doesn't do it. I come in an hour later, and I start arguing with her. Like, no, I'm not joking. Like, you need to make this guy a DNR in the system. Doesn't do it. Oh, leave me alone. You're jinxing me. Nothing's going to happen to this guy. It's my last night. I'm busy, blah, blah, blah. So I go in one more time at maybe midnight, and I start yelling at her. Like, hey, I'm just a nurse here, but you have got to make this guy a DNR. If something happens to him and we go against his wishes, this is brutal. It's wrong. Sure enough, 2 a.m, we go to clean him. I'm cleaning him with a charge nurse. So the charge nurse is kind of in charge of the floor. Mm-hmm. And we're cleaning him up, and we flip him around, and the dude's blue. I mean, he's gone. He's on his way out. And I know this is brutal to admit, but I'm arguing with her, saying, let him go. Like, this is what he wants. He's a DNR. And she says, you have to bag him. Like, you have to bring him back, or at least try. And
the blue is just from lack of oxygen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we flipped him over, when you're paralyzed, even the waist down, you're just not moving very well. Any small movement sometimes, especially when you have a trach, can throw you through a loop, and and you just don't recover.
I forgot he had a trach in too.
Yeah, he had a trach as well. So we flip him back over, and I'm arguing over his body. Like, I want to honor his wishes, and she was right. I mean, I hate to admit that, because I would, that's jail time for me if I don't do it. And so I have to bag him, and I bag him, and he comes back. The doctor runs in, and I just go off on her, start yelling at her in front of everybody. Like, you look at this guy. You just made this guy suffer for 6 more months because you didn't want to do the basics of your job, blah, blah, blah. And I kept telling, she's crying, and the next morning I kept going, because I'm like, you just ruined this guy, to me, that's criminal. I feel like maybe not, maybe she doesn't need to go to jail for that, but
metaphorically, I see what you're
at
saying.
least punish her, at least take her license, or make her nothing, not the VA, nothing, not even and I told everybody, I wasn't a full-time employee there. I was a travel nurse. Obviously I worked full-time, but I wasn't considered one of their staff. I mean, my buddies, he was a assistant manager there, cool dude. He was a corpsman. One of their only, real strong military guys that was there. And just nobody did anything. He couldn't do anything about it. He didn't have the power to make anything happen. But to me, that kind of stuff in a hospital is criminal. In the VA, that kind of stuff happens all the time.
How much longer did he live?
About 6 more months. I mean, I was right. He died just about maybe 3 weeks ago.
Had you not bagged him in that moment, how long do you think it would have taken him to expire?
He was gone. I mean, he was blue. He was probably a minute, 2 minutes to being gone.
Did he ever recover consciousness after that?
Yeah. No, he recovered and came back. I loved the guy because he, at that point he could but he flipped me off all the time every time I see him. The guy loved me. But but he took it out on all the staff, and a lot of the VAs filled with some really good nurses, and I mean, genuinely some of the best nurses I've worked at are at the VA. Some of the worst nurses and worst humans I've ever worked with are at the VA as well. And it's just like the military, you can't get rid of them. So you have like the best, you have people that are in there for the right reasons. And then you have the absolute worst where I don't think they could work anywhere else but there. And it's very hard to fire people. And so you get a decent amount of both. And it causes a lot of problems in the system. But so what he would do is just mess with the nurses that were bad. I mean, he had a like a suction, because you got to suction yourself quite a bit when you have a trach, and he would just click on the side of the bed 24 hours a day if he didn't like you. Sometimes if he was in a mood, he would do it just to get on your nerves. But and you had to respond because the guy would lose oxygen pretty quick. So I thought it was hilarious, and he didn't do it to me that much. But I, some of the nurses would go, he would drive them insane, and then I would come in and help him, and he would just smile at me like, yeah, you know exactly what I'm like. Yeah, I know exactly what you're doing. So I got him once good. I felt bad. I made him cry, but he did it to me one time, and I had just had enough. So I walked in and I grabbed his stick and I just banged it on the side of the bed, and I just looked at him. He looked at me, and I just banged it again and looked at him. Banged it again and looked at him. He said, exactly. How does that feel? Exactly. And then he stopped. He got a little teary-eyed, and I came back and apologized to him. Say, hey, man, you gotta, I'm here to help you. I don't do this stuff to you like some of these other guys. So, yeah.
What do you call a doctor that's not a resident anymore? Just a doctor?
Doctor, yeah.
So it's kind of.
I mean, they're doctors. They're just in a residency.
It a probational period?
Kind of. It's like a 3 or 4 year training program at the VA. The VA is a little longer than it needs to be. I think it's a 4-year program. So they get out, they're doctors, and they basically spend 4 years rotating through all the different floors while they're figuring out their next, what they want to focus on. A lot of the doctors we worked with in the ICU they were anesthesiologists. So they were full anesthesiologists, and then they're kind of figuring out where they're going to go next in their, are they going to go surgery, or are they going to go this kind of surgery? The problem, especially in the VA with those kind of guys, is a lot of them, it's not their end goal. So you sit them in an ICU, especially at night, they're alone. They don't want to be there, and it puts guys in danger. Like what happened with this guy is it's not an unheard of story in that kind of system, and it's because of that. You get people that they just don't want to do their job. They don't even want to be there. They just want to get out and do the next thing. And the patients at the end of the day really suffer when you have something like that. So, yeah.
So the nurses and doctors that are working directly for the VA, how are they hired? Are they GS?
They're not GS. They're under, it's a medical, I forget what you call it. It's very similar. But they're not.
Then I ask because for people who are unfamiliar, the GS or Government Service Protocol, you get to 366 days. It's really hard to get rid of somebody. There's that 1 year kind of grace probation.
It's 2, I think. It's 2-year probation, yeah.
For the docs and nurses?
Nurses, it's 2. I think the docs are the same. Yeah.
Then does it cross over to that threshold, though, where it's almost 2. It's act almost of God impossible to remove them?
Oh, my God. I've got I could tell stories for the next 10 years about the VA and some of the things that go on there and they don't deal with, I mean, it's insane.
I worry a couple things, with Trump coming into office, he's got Vivek and fucking Elon.
Yeah.
They're talking a real good game
about
carving out efficiencies in systems. And I have had some conversations with people. Nobody wants to point that scalpel towards the VA.
Yeah.
And
which shocks me.
Well,
it's a second.
It doesn't shock me because of the optic.
Yeah.
The optic that people are they butt up against when you look at reducing efficiency in the VA. What they hear, I think, is we're not going to care for
veterans. Exactly. Yeah.
What I don't think that they realize is that it is a bureaucracy like all of these other bureaucracies.
Exactly. Yep.
And it probably would net better treatment if they did put it under that same optic. But I'm worried it's going to escape scrutiny because of that social optic.
No, I mean, and maybe stuff like this will help. I hope, but I mean, it's it's brutal. I mean, it's when you hear about these government agencies and the waste, and the VA is the absolute king of that, in my opinion, from working there. I mean, it's insane. I mean, they've talked when I started there. I didn't know anything about the VA. I was a typical. Probably like I didn't want anything to do with the VA when I got out of the military. I just wanted to move on with my life, get on to the next thing. And I moved to Florida. 2011, I moved to Florida. My stepdad had passed away when I was in the military. And I moved to Florida. My brother married a girl from that area, and he had lived there for a long time. And so I was kind of helping with my mom, or just being around her. I moved to get closer to her. And we moved there together, and my brother was kind of having a rough time at the time. And then I ended up kind of going to nursing school. I didn't really want to go to nursing school. I tried to start a business, and that flopped. It was actually, we got in some legal issues. It was an ex-military guy that got us into trouble. I went to nursing school, and I saw like I had an opportunity to be like a student nurse at the VA while I was in training. It paid pretty well. It was an easy job. I knew. And that was my first experience with the VA. I had never even walked into a VA before that. I wanted nothing to do with it. I heard nothing but bad things. Mm-hmm. And I interviewed and got, there was 3 of us that got hired into this program. And the inefficiencies are through the roof. I mean, in 2016, when I started there, they were talking about bringing in Cerner, which is a medical health record. And
it's like a database?
It's basically a way. It's not a database, it's a system, an operating system that nurses and doctors use. Okay. So it's an electronic health records. So basically what Cerner is you have all the patient's data. You have the ability to look at, if you have a patient, say in the ICU, you can look at all the systems, what their heart rate is, everything's on one system. I can do all their medication from one system.
Is this what I was hooked up to like December of last year in the hospital when they're beeping stuff? Okay.
Yeah, and so when you're hooked up to all that, I can see that from Cerner. I have a system that shows all that.
Okay.
And, well, the VA, let's put it this way. The VA, when you first get there and you get a job and they do the new employee, whatever, they brag about being the first to have an electronic health record. Well, they brought in their electronic health record. It's called CPRS. They brought that in like 1981. Great. You have a first to get the electronic health record. Well, now it's 2016 and you haven't changed it. So now,
iPhone 1 technology.
Now you're on pace with like Guatemala. You know what I mean? I mean, for real, like that's how insane it is. It's
basically
like
you have a quill pen and a piece of parchment.
It's DOS. It's literally like, Vista? Did you guys do Vista in the SEAL? It's the same kind of system.
What the fuck is Vista?
I think, did you guys use Vista in at least we did in our medical thing? Vista's like the old, it's almost like working in DOS. It's the military.
I never did my own medical stuff. I went into there.
But did you guys you guys had to have some kind of a computer system, right? Like
the
an
Corman
operating
did.
system?
So we had Corman attached to the command.
Yeah.
I would go see them.
Yeah.
I don't have a fucking clue what they were doing.
Yeah. It's Vista.
Okay.
I mean, it's Vista. It's basically the same kind of system. And it's clunky. It's literally like working in DOS as a kid. I mean, when I was like 12, it's the same kind of system. It's insane. So when I first got there in 2016, they were saying, hey, we're going to bring in Cerner. Cerner's like the new thing. You can do everything in one shot. Congress spent billions of dollars doing it.
Are civilians already using it?
Yes, they've been using it.
That's
for
what I was going to say. Okay, so
years.
you're just going to go ahead and bring in the current civilian technology.
Well, here's where we're at now. So 2024, 8 years later, they still haven't gotten Cerner in. And now
they're still using Vista?
They're still using the same kind of old system.
Fuck yeah.
CPRS, yeah. And they don't just do that. The system's so old, you can't even do, like when you go in, you have to log in and you have patient data. So like if you come in as a patient and I need to read notes or whatever, that's one system. And then when I'm doing your medication, that's another system. So I'm operating now in 2 systems. They're both just as clunky. Yes, somewhat. Not somewhat, yes. But not really. And they go out of whack all the time. So you constantly have to turn your computer off and on. And then for ICU nurses, you have another system, to chart like your daily, like if you're hooked up to the machines that you were talking about, so you're basically operating in 3 separate charting systems. It's brutal. And then, they lean on you. Like the big one, especially nowadays in the VA, is drug discrepancies. That's because they've had so many
Meaning
problems
giving
with
somebody the wrong stuff?
wrong stuff, or forgetting to scan a medication, a misplaced narcotic. But and they'll get onto you, and they're really harsh on. I mean, I've seen them bring cops in to nurses and bring them out, and a lot of it's to scare them. It's a scare tactic, so they don't make the same mistake, or so that other nurses see, oh, hey, they're taking it real serious. But you've got, the charting systems are so out of date and so clunky that they'll say, well, the VA isn't as busy as a regular hospital, which a lot of times that's true. But the systems are so clunky and out of date, it's way more difficult. And when you're working in a system that doesn't operate efficiently, I mean, you make a lot of mistakes. And my opinion has always been, I don't care. I wasn't married, didn't have kids. You can write me up 1,000 times for these kind of mistakes. Fix your systems. And my concern is always going to be patient first. I could sit and make my charting perfect and my systems, and my patient suffers. That's just not how I've always operated as a nurse. I'm going to worry about my patient first, and then I'll worry about, and then when I get written up for a drug discrepancy, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to say, hey, I don't know, turn on the computer. It probably was clunky and it didn't work. The end. And I would give them that piece of paper rather than making some huge excuse, which a lot of nurses do. And they would get pissed at me. Like, how are you, this is your story? And I'd say, yeah, I probably turned my computer on. It was going on and off, and I gave my patient the medication. I forgot to scan it. I'm sure that's what happened, because that happens all the time. So, but yeah, the amount of money they wasted on trying to bring Cerner in. And then the crazy thing is, during COVID, I had a patient that she was in charge of, she was like an engineer, computer engineer, and she was in charge. She was one of the top dogs for Cerner in integrating the system, because she was a veteran. Her job was to integrate the systems. And I said, well, what's going on with this? How come they can do this in other hospitals? And she said, obviously the VA operates on an old clunky system. It's the biggest healthcare system in the country, and you have to get all those records into Cerner before you can get going. But she said the truth is, the real reason they've had a hard time with it is just personnel. Each VA hospital runs separately. So it's just getting all these guys on board, and they play all the games. They do FMLA where, my kid's sick, I'm sick, I can't come into work today. And that's from the top down, and they just can't get all these different hospitals on board together, so they just create chaos for them. It's cost the government billions of dollars. They still haven't done it. So now Cerner's out of date.
No way.
Absolutely. The
What
new
are
one's
civilian
Epic.
hospital?
Epic is the new one, and it's like, Epic's amazing. I did Epic in Idaho as a travel nurse, and Epic has you can see when a patient is coming from another hospital. You can pull up what's going on with them. The systems communicate together. You have as if I need a chart on you, you come in and you have injuries. That's a big one for us, obviously, to chart if you have any kind of physical injuries, because you want to make sure that nothing happened while they were in the hospital. You can pull up a body and it's a 3D image, so you can just mark things right there to keep track of it. It's amazing. But now Cerner's out of date by the time they get it in, if they ever get it in.
Are they still trying to?
Yeah, I think so. That's what drives me insane. You mentioned Elon Musk and Vivek, and if these guys, I don't understand with the amount of knowledge these guys would have, why they can't just come in and blow it all up. You absolutely have to come in and just say, all right, enough is enough. This is what we're going to do. Everyone shut their mouths. Everyone's on board, or you're out of here. That's what you have to do.
I look at it, I'll put myself in Elon's shoes for a few minutes. First off, I would take a rocket to work every day if I was able to do that.
Yeah.
Second, let's be very clear. His IQ is substantially higher than mine. So I'll probably sound like an idiot, and we'll just leave it at that. If I was looking at that, not that organization, from my understanding, the Doge organization, would have the ability to necessarily make the change, but they could make the recommendation to somebody who could, right? And I don't know what because I think they're going to identify stuff and then make recommendations. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
So I guess I would have to put myself in somebody else's shoes. Yeah, cool. Each VA hospital works independently.
Yeah.
Just looking at this, like, okay, you guys are using something that was current in the 90s.
Yeah.
Whereas
80s.
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 Whereas modern medicine now
Yeah.
is, let's just use Epic as an example. That's the gold standard. Cool. I don't really care if you want to come into work and put these records in. You have a fucking week
Exactly.
to do this.
Thank you.
And the VA medical system would take a galactic leap forward, at least
Exactly.
in the portal, in the
Exactly.
information protocol.
Exactly.
Cool story that you all work independently, but I feel like the money all comes from the same budget.
Exactly.
You want your money, it's Monday, Friday at 1600 motherfuckers,
no,
which is 4 p.m. for those of you not in the military.
100%. I mean, especially nowadays, you have systems. I don't care what it takes to put in these guys' history in the records. Then you create a intermediate system that does that I can go to and check while you're implementing this new system. I mean, other hospitals do it all the time. And what they do is they farm out other nurses and doctors to come in and help while maybe the standard nurses and doctors are inputting or whatever you have
While
to do.
they're onboarding a new
Yeah,
system.
and they have
Yeah.
so many patients.
It's a
so many-
solvable problem.
Exactly. It's not that difficult, but it is because of the personnel and all the games that they play. And then you got, I mean, it's insane how deep it goes. And I don't know if you know about FMLA and the system. FMLA is like it's family medical leave and assistance or something like that. That's the game a lot of VA employees play, and they're going to hate me for saying this, but I hate it. It's disgusting. So these guys will go and get a doctor to sign off that their kid's sick or whatever, which is fine. You need some time off. Well, they'll do it for a year, from year to year, or they have some kind of medical condition. Long term. What that does, it's basically a free pass. They can call into work whenever they want, and there's nothing the VA can do about it. And if they, if they get rid of all their sick time and all their vacation time, they basically still have that pass to call into work whenever they want. So half your employees have FMLA, and they just, so like if you're busy on a shift, and the dirtbag nurses will find out the patients that are there and how busy it is, and they'll just use their FMLA and they won't come in. And that's every hospital. I've been at 3 VA hospitals. I started in Florida, and then I went to Kentucky, and then back to Florida. They all have that same problem. And it doesn't just go with the nurses. It's the entire system has that problem. And if you don't fix that kind of stuff, you're never going to be able to get anything done. Because they'll do it to punish management. Like, oh, you want me to do this? Here, let me just call in, and there's nothing you can do about it. I'll just say my kid is whatever.
Is there a civilian equivalent of that?
I don't know, not to that level. There's no way. I've never worked anywhere where not at that level. I mean, during COVID, I worked at 6 different hospitals, 3 VAs, 1 local community hospital, 1 large system, the largest system in Idaho, and then another large system in Tampa. And the VA is the only one that I've ever worked at where employees could get away with that. There's nothing like that.
Michael, will you pull up FMLA real fast? I just actually want to read what the actual doctrine is.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah, it's wild.
Do you know if that's a VA system only?
I think it's the federal government in general. Yeah.
Let us take a look at this.
Yeah.
This is how he earns his paycheck.
Go for it, Michael.
Why does it do that? Why does it want to sass you like that?
It's really annoying, though. Does it every time.
You're better looking than Powder, too, by the way.
I know.
Yeah.
Can't you see him, though? We
you're much better
we could
looking.
shave him up.
Yeah.
Lock him in a closet for a month. He'd be about the same color as his shirt.
And you're in Montana. There's not much sun right now anyway. So
No,
it's
I just
perfect.
go outside for a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, so Family and Medical Leave Act. The FMLA entitles eligible employees of covered employers to take unpaid job-protected leave for specified family and medical reasons. So job protected, I think, is the key word there.
Yep.
With continuation of group health insurance coverage under the same terms and conditions as if the employee had not taken leave. Ooh. Okay, eligible employees are entitled to 12 work weeks of leave in a 12-month period. Wow, a week a month.
Exactly.
Some things under here: birth of a child and care for the newborn within 1 year, placement with the employment of a child for adoption or foster care, to care for the employee's spouse, child, or parent, serious medical condition, serious health condition that makes the employee unable to perform the essential functions of his or her job. Any qualifying exigency, this is where, arising out of the fact the employee's spouse, son, daughter, or parent is a covered military member on covered active duty. Wow. Okay.
26 work weeks of leave during a single 12-month period to care for a covered service member with a serious injury or whatever. So all you have to do is get a doctor to sign that off.
Yeah.
And they really don't like to argue too much because it would basically be fighting with a doctor.
It's also the same optic as well. The optic you would face is, are you trying to withhold somebody's ability to care for their family?
Exactly.
Job protected is...
That's the
critical.
The key. Yeah. So imagine now you understand, that's to me, that's the dirty secret they don't talk about a lot. Half your employees have this, half the nurses on a floor have that. So when it's a busy day and you're getting brutalized, these guys will just call each other and go, oh, it's what? There's this patient, this patient, this patient. I'm taking off. I'm using my FMLA. I mean, they do it all the time and it's disgusting. So
it's wild too, because it says, they take it unpaid, which people would say, so what does it really matter? Well, it matters because patient care.
Exactly.
And your ratios are probably all over the damn place.
No, it kills you. I mean, absolutely. In an ICU setting, especially when it's really busy, I mean, you need every body you can get, and it absolutely murders the system. I mean, it stresses. Usually it's a standard group of people that are hardworking. They're going to do whatever they can to get it done, and it stresses them, to a point where a lot of times they'll break, and either they become like the rest of them and just go do it themselves, or they leave and
they find greener
go to another
pastures.
floor. Yeah, exactly. Or they just go to some clinic and sit around and do nothing for the rest of their careers. That's a pretty common thing, especially from the ICUs. Every ICU in the VA that I've worked at has that issue. I mean, as a travel nurse, like I was getting paid quite a bit. I'm a guy too, and the military helps. I never cry about that stuff. I mean, it takes a lot to get me to that level. Mm-hmm. Every now and then I would get pissed and I would go nuts, but I just looked as whatever. I'm a travel nurse. This is my job, is to get beat up and get the worst patients, or the patient that's crapping all over himself, or that nobody wants to deal with. Like, that's kind of my job. But especially the girls that work their tails off. They love veterans. They're there to really help. I mean, they get really beat up in that system, and they get abused. And they break, eventually they'll break, and it's really sad to watch. And there's really not a lot of help for them, and they get overworked because the management has to take care of the patient. They got to get the patients taken care of, and it's a constant problem in those systems. So,
as somebody who has seen that being abused, how would you change the FMLA system?
I honestly think you got to go in and root it out and just say, listen, there's certain standards that we have to have, and if you're a nurse at this level, and it really, to me, any floor nurse, you just got to get rid of that stuff. I mean, given there's times where if you have a kid, obviously you need to take time off. If you have an illness, but the standard needs to be, if you can't do the job and you can't perform in this kind of setting, you can't be working on the floors. There's younger nurses they can bring in. I mean, that's I would just root it out and get it out of there. I don't see how you can fix it when you have that kind of stuff, because the natural response of humans is, if you give them that leeway, they're going to use it. And a lot of times they use it because either they get in trouble or management is on them, and they say, well, screw it, I'm going to go do this to protect myself. Or they're burnt out and broken themselves, so they go use this, and then now they have their get out of jail free card, and they use it whenever. But there's no punishment, there's no penalty for the guys that use that. And I mean, you wonder why it's a broken system, and in the end of the day, the patients are the ones that suffer for that kind of stuff, and they suffer greatly. Yeah. I mean, it's bad, so.
How was the COVID time period, just as a nurse in general, and then interfacing with the VA?
So I have some crazy stories during, when COVID hit. I was working at a VA, and I was splitting time. I never wanted to be institutionalized, so I knew right away I got to get out of the VA system and work at other hospitals. I started at a VA, as an employee, as a nurse, And so I was working at a local hospital in Florida, in Jupiter, Florida, and I was splitting time. When COVID first hit, I have a hard time now because a lot of people look back and go, oh, nurses were dancing. It wasn't scary. When COVID first hit, it was scary. I mean, it was
the first reports were gnarly.
Exactly. And we were hearing all of it because I worked at the VA. We were hearing all the reports from China, and then we were hearing reports from New York, like the real reports of what was going on. And it was scary. Mm-hmm. I remember my first patient in a local hospital. I came in and they hadn't had any COVID patients. And I walked in and it was literally like a war zone. I walked in and there were, crap going off all day long. The pumps were going off. We were given, intubating patients left and right. I had two patients and this was the first where I had real COVID patients, and that's kind of how COVID kind of came in streaks. You wouldn't have any COVID patient and then you'd have 20 at once. And in the beginning, all of them were getting pretty sick right away. A lot of them had all the comorbidities that were causing issues. But my first day in the local hospital when that happened, for one, they locked us in a room. Like they didn't even have there was no negative air pressure. The charge nurses, the old school nurses, were scared to death of COVID, obviously. So the new nurses, I was a contract nurse there. They locked us in a big square room, like eight beds, and it was brutal. There was no air. And we're all like, we're going to die. I have a sick sense of humor, especially after the military. I thought some of it was funny. Me and my buddy were just kind of joking around. But I know like the first day I was in there, we had a doctor. He was a surgeon, and he had gotten COVID from a patient in his clinic. And it was brutal, man. He had one lung. He had been pretty sick. I think he had cancer. He had just survived cancer. And I was in, like, it wasn't my patient. And I was in the room. We were helping intubate him. I've got he's on FaceTime with his wife crying. She's saying goodbye to him. And that was when, early when, patients were totally isolated. And as we're like doing all this, I'm like, where's his nurse? I'm not even his nurse. And I look over and she was in the corner with her head between her knees. She just had a breakdown, just crying her eyes out, and she couldn't function. So we had to tell her, you gotta go somewhere else. You can't, especially in front of a patient, you can't do this. That was kind of the beginning. There was a couple girls in the very beginning on that day that had breakdowns like that. I actually, that day, I made a decision to leave and go to the VA full time. And the only reason was I was worried. I had to make a decision when COVID first hit. I was working at two different hospitals. My fear was I was going to get COVID and get isolated and never see my family, which is what was happening. I was like, I'm never going to see my family again. I don't want to have to deal with that, and I was really worried working at two different hospitals. If I got sick, nobody was going to cover me, So I said, I'm going to go to the VA, and the VA, as an employee, you have the federal insurance, and the federal insurance is amazing. That insurance is top notch. So that was why I made my decision. I went back to the VA. And when I went back to the VA, this gets crazy, but I think it exposes a lot of stuff that goes on in the VA. When I went back to the VA, I had kind of gotten into it with the manager there. She was terrified of COVID. And, in the very beginning, when we were hearing all the reports, we were trying to set up the ICU to, help patients. A lot of setting up kind of makeshift negative pressure rooms, the Cler rooms where you don your gear, so that you don't get exposed. It's all military stuff. Mm-hmm. And I had kept volunteering to help. I'm like, well, this is like basic stuff for military guys, especially if you've been overseas. And they didn't want anything to do. The manager kept getting mad at me, like, get your nose out. And I said, all right, well, you guys have no idea what you're doing, for one. And we were having meetings like I'm not even exaggerating, like every hour for like 2 weeks. When you're having a meeting every hour to change the policy, you're scared and you don't know what you're doing, and it exposes that, So I had enough, and I came in one day, and the manager kind of started getting into it with me. I think I came in when I wasn't supposed to, because at that time I was working at both hospitals, and she started yelling at me and told me to leave. You're going to infect us. She was terrified of other nurses giving it to her as well. And I left and I turned back around and I said, you're the most fearful manager I've ever worked with in my life. Like, you can't lead like this. You're causing everybody else to be fearful, and it's going to break down the whole unit. You can't do this. So she, got mad at me, blah, blah, blah. I left, and my buddies, all the other nurses, called me and said, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get kicked out of the ICU. She knows the game. You're going to get in trouble, and just expect it. And at some point, this is going to happen, I promise you, because she's been calling us asking if she's fearful and, about what you said, because I think she knew that I'd called her out on it. So when COVID, when we first started getting COVID at the VA, I came in and it was actually kind of a brutal story. It was an employee, kind of a heavy set guy, had all the comorbidities, got really sick from COVID right away, and he got intubated. He was in an isolation room, and they had to put him on a rotaprone bed. And a rotaprone bed is basically, you have so much fluid in your lungs, and it's just that you can't drain that fluid even by machines or whatever. So you have to flip that patient over on a bed and just physically drain him from all the fluid. And I think it's like 16 and 8. He's flipped over upside down for 16 hours.
When you say drain him, what is the mechanism?
Pull up rotaprone bed.
What is...
You literally drain, so you're physically...
Like he opens his mouth and it pours out, or what are we talking?
He's intubated, right? And he's got all this crap in his lungs, and you're literally physically flipping this guy over and just draining. All of it's coming. I mean, it's the most...
Does it just pour out?
Oh, it's the most disgusting thing you can ever imagine. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Look up rotaprone bed.
Rotaprone.
Yeah, I'm finding a
rotaprone
video.
bed.
I mean, I think I understand the mechanics of the bed.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. You've
draining
got...
a human being using gravity sounds fucking horrendous.
It is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. So that's putting a patient in, but I don't know if you got any videos of. So this is all okay. Yeah. So this is how you put a patient in a rotaprone bed.
Okay, yeah. So obviously, if you're going to be rotating, they're going to be
you have
strapped
to be
in.
serious. And the hard thing, the difficult thing is you got to make sure that everything's strapped in, or
that would be rough.
That patient's dead. Yeah, and then they're obviously on Nimbex, which is like a neuromuscular blocker, so they're totally paralyzed, and they have propofol, so they're completely out of it.
Skip
but
ahead,
it's
Michael.
a brutal.
Let's see this thing driving. Okay, I mean, yeah, so far, yep, we're going to get ready. Go, Michael, go. Holy shit.
Yeah, it's no joke. Oh,
it didn't. Oh, wait.
Yeah, you don't even know how to use YouTube.
I thought I wasn't going to show it.
Enhance.
I'm enhancing.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
What's the price tag on one of these things?
Oh, they rented them, but they've got to be.
Michael, for the love of God, take the fucking mouse icon to the bar and pull it to the right. Yes,
Come
fine.
on, Powder. You can do it.
God. All right. You just skip past it all.
Essentially, that's.
God, you suck.
If you put up like.
You're fired until tomorrow,
maybe
Michael.
as we're talking, pull an actual patient up in one.
I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
So. You're telling me you flip this person over and it's just like...
Oh, yeah. No, it just drains for hours.
What do you...
just draining.
What? What color is it?
Buckets. I mean, it's usually clear. Sometimes it's thick yellow if they're really... Obviously, if they've got infections, which a lot of them do. It's gnarly. It's actually the mucus like that makes me gag more than crap, more than vomit.
God,
mucus at that level is one of the worst things for me.
Yeah, Michael, you had it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's no joke.
How fast can you spin that thing?
You got to be really careful. Yeah, because you can...
I'm not saying
during COVID, I got my guy, the first guy I got him stuck. So he was hanging like... I'm going to get in so much trouble if I admit this. But I was in the room by myself, and no one was there with me. And, I mean, you could kill the guy. I mean, because now his heart is all in a weird spot. He's in a compromise. But I got it. I got it fixed. So what had happened, the crazy thing is what had happened when COVID first hit, I had a patient like this.
And so it basically it goes down the long axis.
It just flips a patient all the way over like that, and you keep him there for 16 hours, and in the morning you flip him back. And
how fast can you spin that thing, though?
you got to be careful. You can't spin it too fast because they're.
But could you if you wanted to?
If you really wanted to screw with somebody,
I'm thinking
like
about
a new seal. You absolutely.
No, I'm
could.
thinking like the
Absolutely.
pilot videos, where they put them in the G thing.
Yeah.
Until they pass. I'm just curious.
It'd be fun. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I've never tried it. We don't get to mess with them too much if a patient's not actually.
Oh no.
Because it's a guy. You call a guy. You rent it. He comes in. He helps you kind of. Like set up the first process, and then he's out of there, and then he comes back. Actually, the guy that
You'd never do it on a
that does
patient.
that
You would do it on
really-
a fully healthy nurse. Just to
yeah.
test.
No, I would do it. I mean, I've already given myself a heart attack basically with the AED, so I might as well try. This would be nothing comparatively.
Estimated price tag on one of those.
I would say $1 million, probably.
Michael. No. Look up
More?
No, I
you
want
don't
you to
wanna
look up the
Oh,
price
yeah.
Oh, I
More
thought you were going to
YouTubes.
say,
More
we're going to do
YouTubes,
this
Michael.
to you.
because maybe it could fit right there.
Yeah. There you go. Next time you have a cold, that's all you need.
Oh no, I'd put him in there for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I would pay him to be in there 2 hours a day, but I get to control it.
Oh, it says get a quote. Hold on, let me see if I can.
Maybe it's less. Maybe it's a couple $100,000, but
It's definitely not cheap.
it's got to be in the millions though, because it's got sensors on it. But see, the brutal thing in a lot of those guys, like our guy had a chest tube. That's a chest tube coming out. Their head has all these tubes going into them. They're usually it's in their neck. If they're at that point, they've got an IV in their neck, a central line.
Yeah, you might as well go direct.
This one's used, but it's 5,000.
Really?
Where's it located?
Get out of here. There you go. I would have thought that thing's like $1 million.
Man, I don't know.
Well, it might be
Oh,
heavily used.
Texas.
Yeah.
It's all right. You said you wanted to go check out Austin, right? We can get you a truck. We'll rent a truck.
Wow, that's not bad at all, actually.
Oh, that's a 24 PN
Is
2009 500.
That's
Yes.
the
This doesn't
selling
look as
price?
fancy
Well, I
as
would have
the
thought
other
it'd be
one.
in the millions. Huh?
I said this doesn't look as fancy as the one in the video.
It's not about being fancy. It's about whether or not you fit
yeah,
that,
it's
Michael.
definitely functional. That'll work.
Oh, dude. Bookmark that page. That might be your Christmas present.
No, I'm deleting
That's
this from
a
search
torture
history.
chamber.
Man, that is...
It's gnarly. So when COVID first hit, this was our first patient, and it was a brutal situation because he was an employee. The family was real involved. Nobody wanted to get him because they were terrified of COVID. The VA, I think the VA has the oldest nursing corps in the country. Like
median
the
age.
average age is older. And they, a lot of them were married and had kids, and a lot of women, and I'm a dude, I didn't have kids. I felt like I should be responsible to kind of do those things. So in the beginning, I volunteered to take COVID patients whenever, and the policy in the VA at the time was you only had to have a COVID patient one day, and you had an assistant to help you change and do all that. This was when we had a full-on
Spacesuits.
Oh yeah, and it was a little overkill. Even then, I thought it was a little overkill.
What was that Morgan Freeman movie? This is another one I guarantee you Michael has. Outbreak.
Outbreak, yeah.
Have you seen
Never
that?
Seen it?
Nope.
No.
God damn it.
Have you seen 12 Monkeys?
Assume that if it's an awesome movie, he hasn't seen it. He's seen Moana, though.
Oh yeah,
I
that's
haven't
good.
seen Moana.
Yeah. What's the new one? Have you seen that Wicked?
Oh, I heard that was horrible.
Okay.
I don't know though.
Gladiator 2.
Oh, heard that was horrible. I've seen the first Gladiator
that one looks
though.
pretty bad
Good.
too. Yeah. That one looks rough.
What character do you think you would have been in Gladiator, Michael?
It's been a while. The main
Denzel?
one.
Would you been Denzel?
No. You would have at best been a dude holding a palm frond, potentially feeding grapes. That is you are apexed out at that. I digress. So back to your guy. One day,
I had volunteered for 3 days to take the patient because nobody wanted him. They were terrified of COVID.
and it was the one day based on, hey, you probably
it was
won't-
exposure. We don't want you
That's
to.
still a good amount of exposure.
Yeah, 12 hours. I mean,
Yeah.
and this kind of patient, you have to be in the room forever. So not only did I do, and I'm nothing special, but I had been through the military and all that. And I felt, especially as a veteran, I was the only veteran on the day shift, just kind of, I more than anything, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. So I'm like, this is my responsibility. I should be doing this kind of stuff. And the nurses were crying. I mean, it was brutal. So I went in and I had that patient for 3 days in a row. The rotaprone is a lot of work. Now, even the respiratory therapists at the time were scared to death of it. So they weren't really helping. So a lot of it, I'm having to do by myself. And usually that's like a 3 or 4 man job, because you really got to make sure everybody's, that they're in there tight, and that everything's safe. And then when you turn, you got to hold all the tubes and everything. This guy had a tube in his nose and his throat. And
An NG tube?
An NG tube, yeah.
They
You got to
fucking
make
gave
sure.
me one of those when I got my surgery.
Yeah, they're brutal.
They tried to give me one when I was in the ER.
Yeah.
This
While you're awake?
Yeah. This little nurse walks in with 2 helpers.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And she says, "Hey, we're going to do an NG tube. And don't worry, I know all the tricks. I got the lidocaine." I instantly recognized what was happening. I was about to be a medical training device.
Oh, yeah.
So my wife's sitting in there with me, and she didn't realize you can say no.
Yeah, yeah.
So I sat there and I said, absolutely fucking not.
Yeah.
And then the doc comes in and he goes, "Well, how come, what's the deal?" And I said, "Doc, you and I both know these are fucking horrendous. I've helped put these in on people. Don't sit there and fucking tell me that this is going to be a walk in the park."
Yep.
And he looks at me and he goes, "Yeah, they kind of suck."
Yeah.
And so then when they put me under, that's the first thing they did.
Yeah,
Getting it
absolutely.
pulled out was, that was a bespoke experience.
Yeah, yeah,
Take a deep breath, bury your chin, and then she started basically a lawnmower.
yeah, yeah.
Felt a lot better though once it was out.
Yeah. Usually it's like a relief when it goes out. I mean, people worry about it.
You can feel it on the back of your throat.
yeah,
I was trying to sleep, and I'd have to rotate my head just a little bit so it wasn't irritating the back of my throat.
Yeah. They're brutal to put in too if the patient's awake, because if you're good, the way to do it is you just got to get it in, and you tell them to swallow a drink, and as they're swallowing, you just shove it. The best way to do it is just get it done quickly. But
the better way is wait till general anesthesia.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with that, because I saw a patient die in Idaho where they were trying to do it with her, and they kept trying to do it, and they kept trying to force it, and she went into cardiac arrest because she was so scared of it. And especially if you're claustrophobic, if you don't like things in your mind, it's brutal. It wasn't my patient, but I watched it happen.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, everyone asked me why I'm so cautious with that stuff. And I'm like, because I've seen somebody die with it.
What are you typing over there, Michael? Are you looking up NG tubes?
Insertion, yes.
In death by insertion?
No, I'm just looking up NG tubes.
Anything good coming up?
Well, imagine,
video.
so it's a tube. Imagine it goes into your nose and through your throat all the way into your stomach is basically where it is. And then you tape it, to their nose so that it stays there.
We could probably have him do one on you.
No.
Yeah.
Not today, but we could come back.
Yeah,
with
the Corpsman used to do that to the Marines.
I'll
all
give
the
you a
time,
bonus.
So, yeah.
No, I don't. It would have to be a very large bonus.
Rotaprone bed.
I'll give you a
Rotaprone bed
$2,000
come
bonus
on,
if we
man.
can put an NG tube in on you.
Ooh, I don't know. That's
That's a no-go?
Don't do it,
think
Michael.
so. I'm not
Yeah.
going to.
So what happened was my first day I go in there and I'm getting brutalized, you know what I mean? Like just trying to do all this stuff myself, and I feel wet all over my body, and I'm like, what the heck just happened? And I look down and the guy's tubing had broke, like at the hub where it comes out of the machine, where it's feeding his fluids, and blood, because it's in a central line, so it's in a heavy, area that has a lot of blood in his neck. The blood backed up and it came and it had been spraying all over me. And we're talking the very beginning of COVID when you're thinking they can't tell you anything. They don't know if it's airborne. They don't know anything. I'm covered in this dude's blood from head to toe.
Is there? I mean, in this situation, I imagine there's a metal door with a small glass window, and people's eyes are just looking at you. As you hear the door lock.
Yeah, basically, that's how it was.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of my experience with COVID was. There was the group of us that got in there and just did it, and the other group, they were absolutely terrified of any exposure to COVID, and some of it got to be kind of absurd. But that happened. So this was like on a Friday. I go and I'm freaking out. Obviously, I take a shower, I change, I call the disease or the infection control people, and they say we don't know. We can't tell you anything. We don't think this is good.
What were you exposed to, sir? Everything.
Yeah. The dude had bled all over me. So I give a report to that nurse at night, and nothing happens. In the morning, I get the same patient. The guy doesn't say anything to me, so I don't think anything about it. And then that day, I'm trying to get the guy's blood sugar, and I poke myself with a needle because he's upside down. I've got to get through all those pads and everything while he's upside down, and I accidentally poke myself. So now I've got two things that happen with a COVID patient. Nobody can tell me if you're going to get COVID, what the chances are. They literally said, we don't know, just stand by. Like, maybe don't work with the COVID patients for a little bit is all they could tell me. So Sunday I came in, took the same patient, no problems on Sunday. And on Wednesday, maybe 2 or 3 days later, I get called into the manager's office, and here's where my buddies had told me you're going to get in trouble with this lady. So after volunteering to take a COVID patient for 3 days, after going through all this, I sit in this manager's office, and she gives me a list of like 15 things that supposedly I did wrong in a room. And that I didn't even know who did it, but supposedly somebody had gone into the room and said you had I mean, it was insane, some of the stuff they accused me of. That you had the tubing hooked up to, IV tubing hooked up to giving the guy blood, which is insane for an ICU nurse. You would never have that. The guy's neck was out of whack in the bed. It was insanity, like all the stuff that they accused me of. And one was I had they said I left a cup of urine on the floor, which the manager, who was now pissed at me, and they had already warned me that I was getting in trouble for kind of talking back to her. She tried to get me for, it's called a delay of care, and a delay of care for an ICU nurse is death. I mean, you can lose your license for that kind of stuff, because delay of care is basically you waited on their care when they needed emergency help or whatever. So delay of care would be like they need blood, and you waited too long to give them blood. They needed cardiac meds, and you waited too long. So you delayed their care, which could have basically cost them their life. Mm-hmm. That's a big one for an ICU nurse. So she had that one on me. And I was like, what the hell? Like, this all came from because they had told me, hey, you watch out. Like, this lady.
And this was all from this one patient.
This is all from one patient, yeah. When I had volunteered to kind of take that patient extra to help the unit out. But this manager had it out for me and was coming, And this was kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, some of the VA policies that absolutely destroyed, especially during COVID. But, COVID just kind of highlighted a lot of the issues. This manager was kind of checked all the boxes. That's all I'll say. She was a lawyer. She had passed law school, but she hadn't done the bar, and she failed the bar a couple times. So when I first got there, all she was doing was studying for the bar. We never saw her. And then COVID hit, and the managers didn't even have to come in. I think every 2 or 3 weeks they had to be there, so they were never even there. This woman had a sign on her door: "Do not knock. Do not see me, call anything you need," because she was terrified of COVID. Well, in my mind, you shouldn't even be there. You know what I mean? You're the manager. You're supposed to be leading us. So we were the ones doing all this stuff.
And she didn't have a medical background at all?
She was a nurse, but she was a typical VA nurse. Like, she wasn't that great at her job, from what I heard. And so she skipped through, got her master's right away, and moved up the ladder and checked a lot of boxes for them. So they moved her up. So you had a manager who wasn't very skilled, moved up the ladder because she wasn't good at that part of her job, and now she's managing a bunch of relatively skilled nurses, and she's miserable. She's bitter at because she wasn't good at her job, which the VA is filled with. The world's filled with those kind of managers, But I think in nursing especially, there's a good amount of them in the VA. I'll just say that. But I came into her office and I had printed out. I had gone. Because I kind of suspected it was coming. I just didn't expect, when I've actually volunteered to go the extra mile, and I was the only veteran on the floor. So it was kind of sad for the patients because, I was one of the only ones really willing to go in the room and work with the patients. I was a veteran, so the only reason I really wanted to stay at the VA is because I cared about the guys, and I felt like, well, if this is the end, they can't have their family in. At least they have another vet in the room to be with them, and nurses at the time and doctors were afraid to go in their room. They were barely spending time in the room. A lot of them weren't going to their room at all and doing the basics of their job. So this manager basically kicked me out of the ICU, and instead of working with patients, I spent the next 7 months outside taking people's temperatures for 7 months. During the height of COVID, which is insane. And I had been warned it was coming, but I look at it as just the waste of resources. Like, when you lose one ICU nurse like that, what they had to do is they had to pull from all these other areas in the hospital, people, other nurses that had ever worked in an ICU. Some of them hadn't worked there for 10 years. And they brought them in just to replace one ICU nurse during COVID. So it took 4 or 5 different nurses to try and replace me. Most of them haven't even worked directly with ICU patients, so they didn't know what they were doing. So what they did is they paid, had to bring all these extra nurses in, and they had to hire from the outside and bring extra nurses in to fill in the gaps. That's just for one ICU nurse, because this manager was mad about, whatever happened. She was protected because the unit a couple years before that had all come after her. She had kind of been brutalizing the nurses, so they decided to, all get together and write a report on her. And then she turned around to management and basically claimed racism, that they're all racist against her. So now she's protected. She was a lawyer.
It's a magic word inside a lot of federal systems.
In the federal system, you just and
not that it doesn't happen, but I'm saying that particular term.
Exactly. Yeah, that now you're a protected class, and you basically get away with, and that's rampant in the federal system. Once you get that, and once you're protected under that, now you basically carte blanche. You can do whatever you want, and a lot of the nurses do that too. And who suffers is the veterans when you do that, because it puts pressure on the system. The people that actually do their jobs have to do your job too, and now you're protected. And then the people that are actually doing their jobs and your job, because you're sitting back doing nothing because you have that protected class, they're actually exposed to more situations. Like what happened with me. I'm going to be exposed more because I'm actually doing my job. You're not. So eventually you're going to get involved in a situation where you get in trouble. So it's like it's this cascade of events when you don't hold people to standards and you don't hold them to account. When there's no accountability, that's what happens. So yeah, I spent 7 months literally just outside doing nothing. Taking the policy was insane during COVID. They had a guard shack outside. And they were bringing, as patients, any workers came into the hospital. It was really just a show. We would literally go to their car and take their temperature in their car. If they had any symptoms, we would call the police, and they would police escort these guys up to the ER and then send them, rather than just setting up like a little side area, hey, you need to go here, go into a little side area.
Why do you need a police escort?
It was insane. I think it was, they had all this extra COVID money, so they were able to get extra employees. I think it was a show to the community, like we're going the extra mile for COVID. To me, it was absolute insanity. And I was going to leave. I had opportunities. I had an opportunity to make like $12,000 a week in the Bahamas when all that happened.
Same thing, travel nurse?
As a travel nurse, yeah. And I wanted to go as a travel nurse. When COVID hit, obviously we were finding out how much money was out there, and I wasn't real happy with the manager anyways, and I just wanted to go make some extra money. But when that happened, I felt like, well, I can't just leave now, because I probably will never be able to work back in the federal system if I don't deal with this issue that this manager accused me of. So I'm going to have to ride it out. And my buddy had called me, and he had the same thing happen to him a year before. And I love that dude. Great nurse, definitely like very skilled. He's a lot like me, like skilled, but doesn't take any crap. You know what I mean? Just kind of does his job and doesn't worry about all the politics. But he had gotten in trouble with her and got kicked out, and I basically investigated for about a year. And he called me and said, "Listen, man, don't flip out, don't leave. You're literally going to go outside. You're going to get a golf cart. You're going to be in charge of all these other nurses, where you're just taking temperatures. They're not taking away any of your money. They're just going to investigate you. The investigation is the punishment. Let it happen and come back, and just make sure when you come back, you know what I mean? You not get her back, but you basically like show her that it didn't break you." Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my attitude. I said, "All right, man, I'm just going to ride this out." But what a waste of resources during COVID,
Well, especially if they had to draw from other areas.
Oh, yeah.
You and I were talking about this, and this is maybe an interesting talking point that people don't know either. This is second or third hand from people that I know in the area. Hospitals were letting nursing staff go because of disputes with, I don't know if they were unionized, but it was about pay.
Yeah.
But then they would bring in travel nurses at a pay that was 3 to 5x what they were paying the people they were letting go.
No, absolutely.
And I didn't realize, and you were telling me on the walk over, they were paying for that via this COVID money. So they were just line iteming it from somewhere else.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Which is insane.
Yeah, there was all the FEMA money that, FEMA and COVID, and what they would do. Like I chose not to get vaccinated. I mean, if you're in the military, you get vaccinated up the, I didn't care about vaccines. I never even thought about it.
Yeah, the air gun line we go down.
Yeah,
with the sickle of penicillin at the end.
Exactly. And I did that. I was a Corpsman, so that's all I did.
Oh, you fucker! You had one of those air guns?
No, I didn't. They stopped that when I was in, but my
did
uncle
not stop
told me
that when I was
we
in.
used to put X's on guys and drop the needle, especially if they, you know what I mean, like some cocky corporal or something in the Marine Corps. We'd bend them over and drop the needle on them. But where were we? Where were we at?
We were talking about travel nurses.
Oh yeah,
money.
yeah, travel nurses and FEMA money. When I first left the VA, I chose not to get vaccinated. I had an aunt. Her sister was a nun. Her sister by marriage. My aunt by marriage. Her sister died of a blood clot to the brain and she got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And I kind of stopped and did a little bit of research. I had already been following like Dr. Malone, Dr. McCullough, a lot of these guys from
conspiracy
early on.
theorists.
Yeah.
It's wild how much of their conspiracy is no longer a conspiracy.
I mean, Dr. McCullough, the most published cardiologist in history, in any specialty, the most published cardiologist. Dr. Malone, who actually was one of the inventors of mRNA vaccine. Dr. Pierre Corey, who was a pulmonologist, a lung doctor. And you're talking about one of the top lung doctors. And then the other guy was Dr. Merrick, Dr. Peter Merrick. He was an ICU doc. Well, those are the 4 studs that had different ideas on it, So I started really listening to them. And those are all the areas that COVID affected, the heart, the lungs, especially intubation and ICU care, which is Dr. Merrick. And then, I was listening to a guy that actually invented the technology, and then some different veterinarian guys. And the reason veterinarian guys, that's where they test vaccine. They use, it's not veterinarian, but it's basically doctors that, are I guess they are veterinarian doctors, but that's where vaccines are tested. So that usually they have the most knowledge. Dr. Hirsch, he's a Yale guy. I mean, I was listening to a lot of big time guys that, and I was starting to kind of compare both and say, I think I'm going to avoid this for now.
What was the VA's policy on the vaccine?
The VA had it was facility to facility. They leaned really heavily on guys to get the vaccine. See, when I got kicked out of the VA to take temperatures, the vaccine hadn't come through yet. There was a lot of word about it. And actually 2020 through 2021, September 2021 is when I left the VA to go travel. And they had just actually the day that I left, Biden came out and said that all federal employees need to be vaccinated and all medical employees have to be vaccinated. That was literally the day I left, and I didn't get vaccinated. I'm like, oh my gosh, I was pissed. Obviously I'm like, I can't work and blah, blah, blah. But he said that to try and put pressure on people. And I had an exemption. I had a legit religious exemption. And it had got approved everywhere I went. So the VA was just doing it. It depended on the VA. Some of them were really strict on it. Some of them not at all.
Yeah.
The VA I was at in Florida was pretty strict on it. And then I was actually at a VA in Kentucky where as a traveler, and they had, I mean, it's a crazy story, but I had gotten, through my travel agency, when I actually said I was never going to work for the VA again when I left. But then the contract came up. I wanted to finish my MBA, my master's in business, and I knew if the VA is behind on personnel now, they're probably not going to catch up for 2 or 3 years. So if I get a travel contract now, I'm going to be good for 2 or 3 years while I finish my MBA, which is basically what happened and what I did. But in Kentucky, I went through my travel agency. I told them, hey, I'm not vaccinated. I have an exemption. They had approved it, and I had been in 2 hospitals before that both had approved mine, so there wasn't an issue. The VA in Kentucky approved it. They obviously, I had emails back and forth from the travel contract, and they said, you're fine. And I started working there. Well, the first day I got there, this is kind of answering your question. The first day I get there, I find out that they're bringing us in to replace the unvaccinated nurses in the ICU. So they're kicking out all the unvaccinated nurses, saying that they can't work directly with patients. And they're putting them in like clinics. A lot of them ended up working from home, which really wasn't that much of a punishment. A lot of them were happy about that. But I kind of thought it was hilarious that they're bringing in an unvaccinated travel nurse to replace your unvaccinated nurses that are...
Because they can say...
Exactly.
That the direct hire employee
exactly
that works for them, they don't have any of those that are working or unvaccinated, whereas you as a contractor...
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really convenient way, literally from a tax perspective, to get around.
Oh, it's dirty. It was dirty. Yeah, I actually all 3 hospitals that I worked at when I left the VA in Florida, they all said that publicly. We don't have any unvaccinated nurses or doctors, and they had a lot, but they were on travel contracts, so they weren't technically their employees. It was a really dirty way. That is
such a bullshit way to
No, it was
land
dirty. It was
statement.
disgusting,
Yeah.
and it was sad because I came in and they're kicking out the nurses. So what happened with me is I came in Kentucky. And I knew not to say anything, but I had a big mouth, and one of the girls leaving was crying about it. And she said, and I was just talking to her, and she goes, "You're not vaccinated, are you?" And I said, "I don't want to." "Yeah, no, I'm not." And I said, "Here's the deal, blah, blah, blah." So I don't think anything about it. Well, I guess she had gone and told everybody that I wasn't vaccinated. So I worked there 3 months, took care of all their COVID patients, and I get a phone call one day from the higher ups, and they said, "Are you not vaccinated?" And I said, "No. Like, you guys approved I wouldn't be here if I wasn't vaccinated. That's literally, or I wouldn't be here if you guys hadn't approved that. That's literally the first piece of paper that I filled out." So I guess what had happened is they went around and they were talking. It was actually a buddy of mine. He was another corpsman that worked in Kentucky. And he had found out there was an unvaccinated nurse that had replaced some of his buddies. And he was my buddy. He'd had no idea it was me. And he was pissed about having to get vaccinated himself. So he goes off to upper management that they had an unvaccinated nurse, not knowing that it was me, not knowing it was me. So the next morning I came in and they basically marched me out of there. It was like, and it was insane. I mean, I was, as a traveler, you get all the COVID patients. None of the nurses want to deal with COVID patients. They were still terrified of it. At that point, I thought it was kind of ridiculous to be terrified of the COVID patients. It was 2022, 2022 at the time. So it was insane.
Well, the data kept more and more and more and more and more pointing in a different direction.
Exactly. And a lot of patients were, at that point, were making it out of there. The only patients not making it had 50 comorbidities and were really sick, and a bad flu was going to kill someone like that. So, but yeah, they kicked me out, and then I got another call from the travel company that felt bad about it, and they said, "Listen, there's another VA contract back in Florida if you want to take it." And I made sure, listen, I'll do it, which is insane that I did it, but I just knew I need a couple more years because I want to finish my MBA. I want to finish, it's easier to do it at the VA because I know I'll have a long-term contract. Most travel contracts at the time were like 3 to 4 months. It's just easier to be in one place. And I went to the University of Florida, so that was in, my VA was back in Florida. And I didn't have a problem there. They all accepted it. They all accepted my exemption. I never had a problem, as far as that went. So, yeah, it was insane. Some of the policies were absolutely insanity. I mean,
do you think there'll ever be any atonement for how that vaccine was pushed? Here's what I believe. I believe that the people who were rushing to create it had the best of intentions.
Yeah.
I do. I don't think that they were trying to kill people.
Yeah.
But watching from a distance, very intelligent, educated people who were literally just trying to offer a different opinion.
Yeah.
and watching them being burned at the stake,
Yeah.
the metaphorical stake,
Yeah.
just crucified,
Yeah.
and massive talking heads. The vaccine is safe. There are no vaccine injuries. And then, I know I've had people on the podcast who were deeply injured by the vaccine. And I don't know if there's, I've heard people say, well, it was it was an experiment, there's microchips and blah, 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 and it's an experiment in control. And my response to that is, I think they really fucked up if it was an experiment in control.
Yeah.
Because I don't think people would go that far anymore. And I just don't understand. I'm not a vaccine. I'm a highly vaccinated person, like you and I. We ran the gauntlet. I have no issue with vaccines.
Yeah.
I have an issue with people who think that I am not capable to think for myself.
Yeah, that's like the core of my issue. Like I have pretty strong opinions on all that. Especially the crazy thing is, while I was working in the ICU all that time during COVID, somebody asked me to be on a board of a group that was trying to help people with the alternative medicine. So I saw both sides of that, and it was wild. I mean, and I worked at 6 different hospitals during COVID, all had different policies. So I kind of had seen every angle. My opinion on that is, there's like, I would look at it as like a Christian. If God came in a room, there's always sin on both sides of any divorce or whatever. One person wants to say this, and everybody's got some issues. Well, the unvaccinated people that were real strong on the one side, I think some people went way too far. And, like you'd get I don't mean to be brutal, but you get some fat guy that has diabetes and 50 comorbidities come in, and he's dying from COVID, and he's pissed off about the vaccine he's going on. And I'm like, you probably should have got the vaccine, because you have nothing, you have no support outside of this.
Yeah.
So you may be one that should have, if you were healthy, I think you probably should have made a different decision, or at least, like you said, you have the freedom to make that decision. My thing on medical freedom is you need to, it's where I think people should burn for it if they hid information.
Yes.
If they hid information on the vaccine for the greater good,
which it is clear that they likely
and
did.
That's not a free society. These newscasters that are going on now trying to back off. No. You had a responsibility to do the research before you came out spouting off medical things, because what it did in the ICUs, and I saw it firsthand, it created hatred from the nurses towards the unvaccinated. And they were, especially at the VA, they were brutal.
Really?
If you came in and you were unvaccinated, the attitude, not all of them, there were a lot of us that were not like that, but the attitude was like, hey, just go off and die. I don't even have to, another unvaccinated nurse or another unvaccinated patient. I mean, it got vicious, because that's what happens when you pump out that information. My thing is freedom. I want the freedom to choose, and if you hide information, that's bullshit. You should have told me what the effects are of the vaccine. I should be able to see that.
They didn't.
I mean, when they first gave you the vaccine, there wasn't even any ingredients on it. I can't even see what's in the vaccine, which is insane. And then they hid like ivermectin, all these other alternative treatments. They hid information on that, and then people should burn for that, absolutely, because it's taken away your freedom to choose. And then they'll say, well, it's for the greater good. Well, no. There's no, that doesn't apply in a free society. It shouldn't apply.
It's a really weird binary conversation too, where you either completely trust what the medical professional is saying, or you're a denier and you want people to die.
Exactly. Yeah, it was
what?
Exactly. That's where it went. But the medical community is so captured that you got the FDA.
Well, the 5 people that you mentioned too that you were listening to, guess what community they fucking come from?
Yeah,
the medical community.
Yeah.
There wasn't even consensus amongst that.
Right. But there never is. If you
that's the point. Let's have a goddamn conversation.
Thank you. That's exactly what my point was. And then let me make my choice. I mean, that's my problem with like the VA healthcare system as a whole, is you're locked into this system where there's not a lot of freedom to choose. If you're an older patient, you don't really have a lot of the decision. You're not even presented all these other options. Whereas a patient, you should be presented that and be able to make your own choice. Okay, here's the odds of this. Here's the odds of this. Here's the side effects if we do this surgery. And it doesn't go, you got to be able to have that information and make those decisions. And yeah, they hit a lot of that, which wasn't good. I think it's evil.
I mean, a lot of people I've heard talking, basically Fauci is the devil. And I mean, you could research Fauci all you want to your heart's content. My contention through the whole thing was, I think we would have been better off if they just told the fucking truth.
Exactly.
This is the best information we have today.
Exactly.
And this is what we think is the best approach.
Yeah.
And just be honest with
Exactly.
what you know and what you don't know. Because, and I haven't spent an immense amount of time researching this, but the vaccine injury stuff is definitely real.
Oh, yeah.
And if you start researching some other, like there's now surges in other types of medical maladies in age groups that didn't appear anywhere else until a few years ago. And I'm not trying to connect the dots and be a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, to ignore that and only look at one side of it, I mean, what are we doing here?
It's insanity. I mean, my thing with that is, so if you, I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this, but I don't care. Like I dealt with so much during COVID and watched so many people die, and all the because I didn't get vaccinated and because people found out. I mean, there were times where I got brutalized, and my attitude was always like, you guys are falling out with COVID left and right. They got vaccinated. I don't care. You do. I'm like you said, I'm medical freedom, whatever you choose. But this vaccine is not preventing you from getting COVID, and it's definitely not preventing you from giving it to other people, because it's happening all around you. I actually never got COVID to where I had to take time off. I got COVID in Idaho 2 years after COVID started. I was out for a week and I had a sore throat, and I never missed a day of work because I was on a travel contract, and I just had a week off naturally the way my shifts work. So I literally, the whole time during COVID, I never lost a day for, actually having COVID. And I mean, nurses would tell me all the time, like, you're going to die when you get it. It's going to be that bad. And I'm like, you guys are falling out left and right. And you can't tell me the side effects of this because it's so new. And I mean, here's my thing. Like this is what I was going to say I was going to get in trouble for. When I started really researching it, especially the mRNA vaccine, you've got, DNA codes for mRNA, right? mRNA takes that code and delivers it to the ribosome. The ribosome is like the machine that produces a protein. Well, that machine, the ribosome, produces the spike protein. Well, the spike protein in COVID is the worst part of COVID that causes all the issues. So right away, I thought, it doesn't seem like that's the best thing to have your body making a spike protein, because it's the autoimmune attacks. It's not a natural thing. You're bypassing your DNA. And then my big one was DNA regulates that process. DNA is the instruction manual that says, okay, Andy, you need X amount of protein to build more muscle. Well, if it keeps going, you're going to die. You're going to get over muscle or over protein. That's how cancers, all those kind of things happen. So if you bypass your DNA and you go right to the mRNA, you have nothing regulating that. So how do I know how much is produced? How do I stop autoimmune diseases? And it's off the charts. And then another one, when I was in the military, because I was a little bit older, we had a problem with a smallpox vaccine. Mm-hmm. Like they were out of date, like 6 months out of date. And actually it was on my resume for a long time, and now I could care less about it. But I think I saved our unit like $5 million because I said, listen, I've worked in medical companies before. Just because it's out of date, a lot of times they'll give extensions. Let me call, blah, blah, blah. So I call and they say, well, what's the batch number? And I say, well, here's the batch number. And they go, okay, you're good. Like, we're going to give you an extension, blah, blah, blah. And so I started asking them, well, why is this? Why did you ask the batch number? And they said, because some batch numbers had too much of the virus in it, and it was really harming guys.
A hot load, if you will.
Exactly. So
when that
happened with it, powder, baby. So when that happened, I thought, how can that? I know that that's happened because I've talked to vaccine makers themselves. And
fucked me up.
Yeah. And how do I know that with the mRNA, it's not the same thing that you have? And now they're saying that some batches had all this extra virus in it. I'm like, I remember that from the military, making those phone calls and finding out that, no, we did have batches that had extra virulent, like extra strong.
That smallpox, I got that right before the initial
the
invasion of Iraq.
Yeah, yeah.
That had me
yeah.
flat on my lymph nodes were the size of golf balls.
Yeah, yeah. I used to love giving that and watching guys get all torn up because we had to give it.
That was the easiest one to get because
yeah.
you know, the little tap tap. You don't even feel the thing.
Yeah.
My wife was pregnant at the time, so I got it on the plane.
Yeah.
Our first stop was in Incirlik, Turkey.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there like, this ain't feeling too good. We landed in Saudi Arabia. Holy shit, I was down hard.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's brutal. And, I mean, we had all kinds of, when we first gave the vaccine in the hospitals, usually you could, you know, especially in the VA, because I came back, I finally, like after getting kicked out for 7 months, I finally had my time to like with the manager and with the leaders in the VA system. And, you know, and they allowed me to come back because everything she accused me of was false, you know, and I was able to prove that. But when
Does that reflect on her at all?
No, I'll tell you, no, which is disgusting.
Which is wild, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I'll tell you how disgusting it was. So I found out when I finally came back and they allowed me to come back, I had to meet with upper management, you know, to have my day in court, I guess. And I had printed out right after it happened when I got in trouble in the VA from that manager. I went in and printed out that night nurse's notes from the night that I gave him report. So I had all in a printout that at 8 p.m. at night, right after I gave him a report, I mean, in an ICU, you have to be, the notes are very thorough, and it's a checkoff thing. Literally everything that I got accused of, this guy had gone in at 8 p.m. and checked off. That his head was in a proper place, all the IVs were in proper place, no problem with the blood tubing. I mean, like, what I got accused of like 13 or 14 things, and literally at 8 p.m. he went in and checked off every one of those things. So when I had my time, I said, wait, either this guy committed fraud, either he went in and didn't see those things, or he never went in the room, or he's, you know what I mean, he's full of it. And you're accepting this because this man, and I know what happened. This manager, you know, he's going to do whatever she says. He's one of her boys. So he, you know, 5 days later fills out a report that's saying that I did all these things. I mean, if we were anywhere else, that's absolute fraud, and it's actually potential prison time, because you've gone in and absolutely lied that you did all this stuff, and I got investigated for 7 months, and he got no punishment for it. For her, they brought me back. She had no consequences. She left because I did two things. I called a lawyer. And I genuinely wasn't trying to sue them. I was trying to back them off so that it would never happen again. I wanted them to know, listen, if I stay in this system, and that's, my buddy had told me to do that. He said, listen, you call a lawyer, do the dance, come back, and then he said, you could be like me, they'll never mess with you again, which is what would have happened. But I had called like EEOC or something. It's like the state investigative committee, and as soon as the next day that manager said she was leaving because she was a lawyer, and if she had lost that, which I think she knew she was going to lose, it goes on her legal record as a lawyer, and as a brand new lawyer she wasn't going to be able to work. So there was absolutely no consequences from the VA.
Any idea where she is now?
She's a lawyer somewhere, yeah. She finally passed the bar. But what the crazy thing is, the really bad one in that I was like, this is so illegal and so obvious what this woman did. She tried the urine that she accused me of leaving on the floor, that she tried to give me a delay of care for. There was never even an order in it in the system. So when I finally was able to look in the actual system, I'm like, this was never even ordered. So you're accusing me of leaving something on the floor that was never even ordered. You're accusing me, that's an absolute crime, you know, and absolutely she's of a protected class. And so they're allowed she can brutalize me. And they got all the reports 2 weeks after it all happened. So I should have come back 2 weeks later. Instead, it was 7 months because I think they were hoping I would quit, or they would hope, you know, that I wouldn't fight. I think they were just hoping I'd eventually quit. Or a lot of times in those systems, what people do under investigation like that is they snap. And then they're they snap and do something way out of line, and then they have to leave,
Like blowing up at work or something.
Exactly, yeah. And that's kind of what I think happens and what they're hoping for. But that stuff goes on in the VA all the time. I mean, you get these protected class of people that know that they're protected, and they brutalize everyone else, and they get away with murder, and it gets rough. I mean, I worked a day when I first went to Miami. I had a day I was in an open heart unit. And I had come from an open heart unit in Idaho. And, open heart unit is more of those are big surgeries. But I wasn't an open heart nurse, so I'm really not supposed to get an open heart patient. I would get them maybe 2, 3, 4 days after. Well, some of the nurses there were bitter because they found out how much I was making, which is, I was used to that. You get used to dealing with that kind of stuff. And the way I dealt with it, you just work hard. Come in and work hard, bust your ass, and you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, totally.
And eventually they're gonna, even if they're not making that kind of money, I just look at it as like, just make yourself needed, and they're not gonna care about that. And a lot of them, when you're lazy by nature, you're not willing to do that. And you know what I mean? I'm willing to do that, so I'm gonna make the money, and you stop complaining about it. That's how I approached a lot of that. But I had a day in an open heart unit. This guy, he was kind of a protected guy too. Checked a lot of boxes. I come in and he gives me this patient, and I'm like, I'm not supposed to take an open heart patient. It's like a 1-day heart, and it was an absolute dumpster fire. The guy was, not only am I not trained as an open heart nurse, which is a set training, it was a dumpster fire. The guy was super sick. The doctors were arguing over what to do, with the patient. There was like 3 different specialties. They were arguing about it. And I'm stuck in the middle of it. And when I came in, I couldn't get in. I couldn't get into the system. Like my ID wasn't working for some reason. So, it's amazing that the guy didn't die. I literally had to do all that without any help, because this nurse who was in charge, is supposed to be in charge and supposed to help me, did nothing. Just sat there while I'm trying to suffer in a room, go back. And thank God I had experience, so I knew how to kind of get around a lot of things. But and I almost did. I almost went after the nurse, because there was so much chaos in the room with all the doctors arguing and everything. The guy was on a lot of emergency, like life-saving meds, especially cardiac meds. You're constantly changing bags and trying to, the way I deal with that, I just go over religiously and make sure every bag is up and it's hooked up to the right area. Well, I had hooked up the wrong bag to a pump, and the bag was a cardiac med that I had hooked up, and it was supposed to be a med to kind of keep him sedated. And so the amount that we were going to give him was like, it would have killed him. It would have killed him in minutes. And because I was so religious about checking, I caught it at the last minute. So, I had been in ICU for a while by then. I just switched out the bag really quick and fixed it. But I came out of the room, and the nurses had to hold me back, because I'm going to kill this guy. I don't care. I'm a travel nurse. I don't need the job. I'm going to kill this guy for putting me in this situation, because he could kill this patient. And that's the kind of stuff that happens that I want to get out there in those kind of systems when you have these protected classes. It affects the patients on that level, because they play those kind of games all the time. And if they're protected, man, you're going to have to do all the extra work. And I don't know. Did you ever see that interview with Elon Musk and Don Lemon or Don Lemon?
Don Lemon?
Yeah. Where they were arguing back and forth, and Elon Musk tells him, well, would you hire a doctor based on all these protected things? Would you hire a doctor even if he wasn't better because he was black or because he was gay or whatever? And Don Lemon's like, yeah. And Elon Musk is telling him, not if he's not the best. You hire the best doctor. Like, you don't check the boxes. You hire the absolute best doctor.
People only answer that way when it's a hypothetical situation.
Exactly. I can tell you in real time that I've sat there at a VA and seen that happen. Where I went to when I first worked at the VA in Florida as a new nurse, I had worked with this guy. He was a trauma surgeon. The guy was an absolute stud, and I trained with him in school, and the guy was amazing, absolute lifesaver. And I sat with him at a VA one day. He was there, and I was like, "What are you doing here? Like, why are you at a VA?" And he said, "I'm applying to be their chief surgeon." And I was like, "Dude, if they get a guy like this, like it's over. Like the VA would be." It would be amazing. This guy knows what he's doing. He's a trauma surgeon, whatever. And he said, I'm not going to get the job. And I said, why? And he said, because I don't check the boxes. and it was obviously race stuff, but a lot of it actually, then it was he wasn't military. He said, I wasn't prior military, so, and I said, well, who are they going to hire before you? And he said, this one guy, and the guy had no experience compared to him. And I started working there after, and the surgical unit was an absolute mess. I mean, it was a nightmare at the VA. And so that stuff is real. I mean, they hire people even nurses and doctors that check all these boxes. And at the end of the day, the patients suffer. I mean, it's brutal. It's a very common thing in the VA system, even with nurses and doctors. It's very sad.
Hold that thought. I'm going to take a piss.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's my thing with all of it, right? So say there's diarrhea, right? So a bunch of scientists get together and say, hey, what would happen if we created super diarrhea? Super diarrhea in a lab that could kill half the country or half the world, right? Let's just do that. Well, that doesn't seem like a very good idea. No. Right? I mean, but that's what they've been doing for years.
Oh, the gain of function stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So, okay. So now we created super diarrhea. And then, when there's an outbreak in that area, we're going to say, oh, freaking unicorn, ate some unicorn dust. And that's how super diarrhea, not the actual facility that was creating super diarrhea, And then, and we're going to have and we already happen to have a vaccine that we were working on that's already there that just happens to work for this. And then you say, well, how about apples? Like apples work for diarrhea because they have fiber. Oh, no, that's evil. You're racist. We're not going to have apples. No, you need this unicorn dust. You need to eat this. And this is the only thing that's going to fix it. And then later, quietly, you say, you know what? Apples do kind of work. And we'll just keep that quiet.
What do you think would happen if they did say, yes, it was an accidental leak on a human-engineered virus that came out of Wuhan?
I think it's going to be, it would be, I think
it changes
the rabbit hole goes so deep is I think so many big players were involved. I think it's a world, I think it was a big system behind all that. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people would burn. That's what I think. I mean, I think that it wasn't just, our country. It wasn't just, I think there was a lot of people involved. They would get exposed. But I think we've given them so much time to hide the information. That
you can Google Canada flew on a commercial airline, Ebola, to the Wuhan lab. On a commercial airline.
Yeah.
It definitely, our involvement there. Are you looking that up, Michael? Yeah, pull that thing up.
They flew it in a test tube or whatever.
Yeah. So that they would have the material that the lab could work on it. Yeah. But again, we also had some of their scientists training on, I think they called it level 4 criteria in Texas. Yeah. It's not
North Carolina too. Yeah. I think North Carolina is where all the
it did it to you again, Michael. Look at that suit. That's what I'm talking about. Yep. Canadian scientist.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, the Canadian scientists didn't do that illegally.
Yeah.
It was an above board.
Oh, yeah.
It was intentional so that they could work on and have that virus.
Yeah. I think a lot of the gain of function and the stuff that had been going on for years because no one really thought about that stuff until now. I think it's insane. I mean, I that's what I mean, the whole thing of diarrhea. It's like, so you're going to take something that has minimal kill ratio and you're going to make it super deadly. That doesn't seem like a good idea to me. And I
get the argument, but it's an escalating Jacob ladder to hell.
Exactly. And what do we have a contingency plan if this gets out? And what are we going to do with that? Which seems like is exactly what happened, you know. And I mean, there's all the emails back and forth on Fauci and all these guys hiding information. I mean, come on, it's a joke.
I hope it sees its day in the sun.
I do too. Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely, for justice sake, it absolutely should. I mean, it needs to. The crazy thing when I was in high school, I went to a private school, and the professor there
just wipe it.
Yeah. The professor there was talking about one world governments and how eventually the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, all this crazy stuff. We thought the guy was nuts. It was my senior year in high school. He was the father-in-law of one of the pastors there, and he taught. And literally, the last couple of years, I've called a lot of people I went to high school with. It was a small school, and a lot of us kept in touch, and we were like, this guy's, maybe he wasn't as crazy as we thought he was. You know,
It's called
lot
a
of these
cabal,
guys are,
which is a word I'm trying to use more in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's a great word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't used it much until recently.
Yeah.
What would you, king for a day at the VA, in the medical world that you worked in?
Yeah.
I guess two things. What would you want people to know about what's happening that they have no idea? And then what would you change?
So the accountability is the big one. Some of the stories I've told are, I'm like I said, I'm a vet. I'm pretty rough around the edges. None of that stuff broke me. I actually found it kind of funny that as I got punished for all this crap, it ended up, sending me off. I traveled. I paid all my bills. It ended up working out for me, but it cost the VA a fortune. So my big one is accountability. You have to have accountability in the system to, everything, to institute a new, the patients suffer when you don't have accountability. The kind of stuff that I talked about that happened to me happens all the time in those systems. And it breaks a lot of nurses and doctors, or it makes them turn the corner and become just like everybody else so that they can survive. And at the end of the day, my biggest thing is the patients suffer. So you have to come in and absolutely be willing to blow up the system and have accountability. You got to be willing to get rid of people, all the freaking government bullcrap bureaucracy. You got to get rid of that stuff. And you have to not be afraid to shine a light on it. That's one thing. And there's another angle that I hadn't really talked about that I personally think a lot of these special interest groups and a lot of these vet advocacy places and what do you call them? The lobbyists and stuff for the veterans.
Yeah.
A lot of times that works against the veterans. And the reason is say like my example would be open heart surgery. If you need open heart surgery, most hospitals, you have to be a good candidate for that. Mm-hmm. You can't be lazy, fat, out of shape, all these other things, and say, I'm going to go in and get open heart surgery because I'm about to lose my heart if I haven't set any of the standards that would make me a good candidate to recover well from that system. Well, in the VA, they'll give guys like that open heart surgery because they'll go to these advocacy groups and they're fearful of the information getting out and that they're more fearful of having the bad press. So they'll give these guys those kind of surgeries and they end up dying like really brutal deaths because they're not a good candidate for that kind of surgery. So a lot of these advocacy groups actually don't help the veterans. It's the exact opposite. You know what I mean? And a lot of the veterans that make a lot of noise and cry and complain, some of it's their fault too. You know what I mean? They make it really bad for good dudes who need help. A lot of the guys that are just trying to milk the system, and get their disability. Sometimes that's a full-time career.
A lot of people do not want to talk about that, man.
Exactly, and they need to talk
about
about that. And what bothers me is when you come in as a patient and you're doing that stuff, you don't think, I know, I've been there. I've been, in Iraq. I've seen, blast injuries. I was in some of those myself. And I know, like, you just know the difference. I know that you've spent your entire career in the military. You want sick call commandos that were never sick, and not always, but there's plenty of those guys. And you're right. They do need to start calling that out and that really ruin it for good, solid dudes that really did something, that aren't complainers, that aren't crybabies. Those kind of guys force the VA and force the government to make rules that really harm good dudes that really deserve it. So those guys in my mind should burn. I hate to say it like that. They should have consequences for that, but it's a very difficult thing to navigate. So that's the one. And then what was the other one? What changes?
What would you change? Well, actually, before you go into the changes, you've worked in civilian and VA healthcare.
Yeah.
Is there a legit difference between the two?
Yeah, the biggest difference is the VA is not like. So there are good people in the system. It's the system that's broken, and that causes all these personnel issues, all the things that I talked about, that FMLA where people call in and they're never there. The abuse of personnel, like what happened to me, is a very common story in the VA. There's no accountability. So in a regular hospital, you would never get that. No way. I mean, regular hospital, you'd be gone if you pulled some of that crap, especially a manager or another nurse that like what they did to me. That's actually illegal, and you could be prosecuted for something like that. You literally went in and I mean, it's crystal clear you committed fraud. I could pursue that legally, and they're going to bleed me dry before it ever comes out, so it's not even worth it.
And the problem is that you end up with a different caliber of person.
Exactly. And that's what happens all the time there is you end up with low quality, and you end up with a ton of people that know how to play the games and know how to abuse the system, and they rule the roost, and they beat up everybody else that actually works. And the people that work really hard are actually exposed more to these events because they're actually working and doing the job. So it's like this cascade of just disgusting things that happens. And at the end of the day, the patients suffer for that kind of stuff. All of those situations, the patients suffer. So if I had like what I would change, for one, I personally think, this is my opinion on it, politicians don't want the VA to get fixed a lot of times on both sides of the coin, because whoever's in charge, they don't want the other side to get the victory. So they're going to vote and do whatever they can to not get that victory, because that's a big victory if you fix the system. And I find it to be like the most reprehensible thing you can imagine. I mean, you send guys off to war at a young age, 18, 19 years old. They don't know any better. I was older when I went, so I had a little bit of a better head on and even me, you put guys through a lot. The least you can do is give them the absolute best system in the country to help them deal with their issues. And if it's not the best medical system that you provide, you should free them up so they can have those choices. So that's like one big thing. Also, I think every VA should have the absolute best charting system. When you compare that to the outside, like you asked, the smoothness of a good, solid, like high-speed system allows you to do your job so much better. When you have a bulky system and it's messed up, you make a lot of mistakes. You don't even get all the information. Patients have to constantly repeat themselves. Patients with some mental issues, I mean, they break over that. They just have to keep repeating their stories over and over and over again. A lot of it's just because you have clunky systems and you can't even find the information, and the guys break from that kind of stuff. So my opinion is, like, overall, they should have the absolute best, the best equipment, the best charting systems. I mean, they should. It's tragic that a guy, that the VA has a charting system from the 80s. To me, that's absolutely disgusting.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, it's disgusting.
Especially when there's already a civilian model that's being used.
And and there's large systems that use it, that interconnect, that communicate with each other. I mean, you should have standards. Every hospital, you should go to the top doctors in the country in every specialty. And if you're going to keep the VA, then every VA should be set up the same exact way. And it's set up from the best minds in the business, saying, here's what an ICU should look like. Here's what our these are the products we use, but they have all these different side deals and,
What's the reasoning for having it disparate like that as opposed to one entity?
I think it's all the what do you call them? All the contractors, and guys have side deals with contractors, or they want to use this contractor rather than the other. So everybody just uses whatever contractor they want, which I think is crap. They should just have one system, and then the contractors provide the items that they actually need. Go out and get this because this is the best whatever. These are the best IVs on the market. These are the best whatever. But it's a rat race and a cluster just trying to get all that stuff done. It's madness.
Which is wild. If I were to guess, before having this conversation with you, the civilian medical world versus the VA, you would think that because the VA is a federal system that they would be mandated to be under one system, and that the civilian system would be the one that has disparate contracts out there and using whatever they want to. It's odd that it is flipped, even though one is literally a federal organization.
Yeah, you would think that, and I thought that when I first started working there, but I've worked at 3 different VAs, and they all have different policies. They all have different – I mean, I worked at VA in Miami. This is horrible to admit, but I couldn't land an IV for like a year, maybe like 14 months. I mean, ICU nurses don't do that many IVs because a lot of times they're already, have IVs or big central lines in, but we have to do them every now and then. I kept missing my IVs. And then I finally found out that the whole system was different. Like, we're used to, you put fluid in a system before you put it in. Well, this one you didn't, and nobody had told me. I had no training on it. It didn't look any different than anything else, and I realized why I was missing my IVs because I was blowing their veins because it was pressurized. Well, I don't know. There's no way for me to know that.
What gauge needle?
18 or 20. I usually use 18 or 20 usually, which is not a big needle.
It's not.
But
I've had
old
some people come out
guys
with 14s. And
oh
like,
yeah,
hey,
yeah. In the military, you can land those. Though.
get that fucking soda straw out of here.
No, it's brutal. Yeah, in the military, I did that all the time. Especially guys have massive veins because they're in good shape.
Now,
the VA, you're talking old
Yeah.
farts that are smoking. They've been living on the streets forever. Their veins are brutal. I mean, it's the hardest place you could work to land IVs. I mean, that's definitely tough. So.
You can push some fluid through a 14.
You could.
The experience of getting it into the vein
oh,
is
yeah. You could drop a whole bag in minutes
Oh,
through
just
a 14.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a 14 is a trauma. That's an absolute trauma situation. You would do that in the military, obviously, for a major
we used to do it to our
bleed.
friends all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When they're drinking or?
I have plenty of pictures of myself with an IV bag holding it up while taking a piss and a beer in the same hand holding the IV bag.
Yeah, that was as a corpsman with the Marine Corps, that was half our jobs is keeping guys out of trouble after they drink all night, sneaking them into the
air quotes.
Yeah. We'd sneak them into the BAH, at night or early in the morning before a run, and give them an IV and give them a bag so that they didn't pop positive and get in trouble. But yeah, there's a lot of guys that owe us their careers for that because there were a lot of guys on the edge that were getting in trouble for that stuff. So but you guys did the same thing, I'm sure.
Why'd you decide to leave the VA system for the last time? Do you think you'll ever go back?
No, I'm done. I mean, I had the one situation and then the other situation. The last one, I was a travel nurse, and our contract, they tried to undercut our contract, and they basically didn't give us any warning. And I got a call about it, and I was like, I think you guys have to give us like a month's notice if you're going to, they literally cut our contract in half. So I didn't leave. I obviously I got somebody to take care of my patient. I had like 3 days of sick leave left, and I said, I'm done. Like, I'm done here. I'm not, and I left. And then they actually brought us back. I was right. Legally, they had to give us a month notice before they changed the contract. That was in our contract. I just didn't know it was in our contract. So they brought me back for a week, and then they called and said I can't come back because I suppose I walked out on my patient, which isn't, obviously, if I walked out on my patient, that's a legal thing. I didn't walk out. I had somebody cover my shift, and I left. So I'm done with the VA. I mean, I'm in a really good place. I left in September. I finished my MBA. I was helping a nonprofit kind of launch the last couple months. That's done. I mean, which I'm thankful for. It was a good bridge. Kind of a positive bridge to help me. And I was kind of on compassion fatigue. I think the operator fatigue for you guys, right? Where you just, it's.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I see that a lot in my law enforcement friends.
Yeah.
Two things. One, they get a very jaded perspective of humanity because of who they're constantly interfacing with. And it just, it kind of mutes their emotional response.
Yeah.
Which I think if you are in it long enough, you might not be able to turn it back up. I'm not sure.
No, old bag ICU nurses are like some of the most heartless. They're brutal. It is they're brutal. Vicious because they've seen so much death. They've seen so much, especially in the VA system. They've seen so much just a messy system. They've seen so much of that. They're like zombies. They're like bitter zombies. They're brutal. And so I got out and realized I'm done. I would never go back to the VA again.
Are you going to keep nursing?
No, I think I'm done. I got my MBA for a reason. I've kind of actually helping this nonprofit was good. It was healthy for me. The guy was a double amputee. It's called Hooking Veterans. They're taking guys out on really high level fishing trips. It was like a good positive bridge. And what I kind of realized what I'm good at is business consulting. And so I changed my whole resume to that. And I haven't worked since September. I worked for this nonprofit.
Yeah, you haven't done
for
nursing
free.
work.
Exactly. But I was busting my ass for this nonprofit. That's done, and I've kind of learned what I really like to do. I like to help companies kind of get to where they need to, and then I'm out of there when all the drama and all that stuff occurs. I'm out. I've dealt with all that in nursing, and I mean, nursing's full of drama. I'm tired of that stuff, so I'm kind of moving on. I'm trying to develop an app with another nursing friend, and we're going through some app developers now. And then I'm really just kind of putting my name out there, trying to do consulting. But I think the floor nursing, I'm done. I can't. A lot of the policies I have the more I'm removed from it, and I think down the road it'll just grow stronger. I have some serious issues with a lot of the way they do medicine these days. I think, like we talked about, medical freedom is really important. And a lot of times if you work in a traditional hospital system, you're not going to see a lot of that. And it becomes hard to deal with, and it's just not something I really want to deal with anymore. So I feel like I've saved a bunch of money. I'm free. And I'd rather, even if I didn't work for 6 more months, I don't care. I think it's worth it. So.
How'd you get, or how long did it take you to be comfortable with being around that level of death? It's a different setting, right? You're in a little bit more of a clinical setting, but it's not uncommon.
The strange thing is I talked about how my dad died, years ago. I feel like God kind of prepared me for that kind of stuff. So the sad thing is I do feel, any nurse that I work with would tell you I'm pretty good in those situations because I've dealt with it myself. So I think a lot of times to me, ICU care is not even taking care of the patient; it's taking care of the families.
That's interesting.
If this patient's on his way out and suffering,
which you're going to know before they are.
Yeah, exactly. The best thing you can do for them is take care of their husband, take care of their wife, take care of their kids, and let them know, hey, you need to take care of yourself. You need to, and that really puts a smile on the patient's face or puts them at ease. My example is he was a master gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, came in one time and he had open heart surgery. And you know how master gunnery in the Marine Corps, that dude's hardcore. Mm-hmm. Screaming and yelling at everybody when he came out of being intubated. And I get him, I hear his report, and his wife comes up and she's, 70. This guy's, he can barely move. He's going to have to go through this big process. And I watch her and she's half blind. She can barely walk. And I'm like, has anyone even thought of just taking care of his wife? Like, just go grab a wheelchair and take her back and forth. And why would you do that? You go too far. I started doing that for her, just looking after her. And the guy was like, it was like a 180. You know what I mean? The nicest dude you've ever seen, telling me stories for days about his, and that's a big example, but that's a very common thing in ICU. All you have to do is take care of their loved ones. And a lot of times you'll see the patients change and they'll kind of turn the corner because it's, that's what's most important for people before they die. For me, I dealt with a lot of personal loss in the military. That the guy that was a chaplain, Flying Tigers is who it was.
Okay.
From the Korean War. That's who his dad was. But that chaplain died right when I went into the military. I was right out of boot camp. It was crazy. He was a big reason why I went in. I left a really good job. He was really pumped about me going. The last phone call I had gotten from him, he was delivering on a volunteer basis, delivering death letters to families in California. Just guy had a huge heart, and he just died of a massive heart attack. So I dealt with that right out of the right going into the military. And then I had a roommate that died, a 21-year-old kid. Yeah, actually, Michael Montoya, the
yes.
EOD guy. He probably knows my roommate. He died. He was a corpsman. He died in an explosion right as I was coming back from Iraq. And then my dad died right before I was supposed to go to Iraq again as a CASEVAC, as a flight corpsman. And then my dad dies right before that. So, and then right when I got out of the military, a month later, my best friend that I grew up with died. He was a fireman. It was a big story in California. He died. He fell over in a truck and died. So I feel like God just kind of prepared me for a lot of personal tragedy while, in the military and trying to make a lot of decisions. So I feel like I was good at helping people wade through that. But I was 8 years during COVID, some pretty heavy times. I stayed in COVID units because I felt strongly that these people are dying isolated. I've been through some of that, so it's good to be there for them in their last moments, As far as being I don't think you can ever fully be prepared for it, You kind of turn yourself off. But it's one of the reasons I started to realize I probably need to get out, is it started to affect me more. I actually had a breakdown. I was in my MBA. I was doing we were consulting this veteran nonprofit called Hook and Veterans, and I was getting up and I was talking about the Tyler's the main guy's name. He's a double amputee. I was telling his story, and I just started crying in the middle of class. And I was like, "What is going on, man?" I'm an ICU nurse. I see this all the time. I see guys.
Doesn't mean you're impervious to it.
No, and I think it's where I started to really realize. And then I walked away, and I went upstairs, and I could not stop crying. And I was like, "What happened to me?" And I think it's compassion fatigue is what they call it in nursing, any medical. But I think you get to the point where you break, and it just starts to get dark, and that's when I realized I probably need to get out of this and start to do some positive things, maybe get into business or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So let's say that they develop a team that would look at critically the VA. How long do you think it would actually take from just, again, the medical side, because there's a variety of branches.
Yeah.
Just from what you've seen the medical side, how long do you think it would take for them to make appreciable change?
I mean, the truth, if they got rid of all the special interest groups and all that crap, I think it'd be 6 months. It's not hard. It's like anything else. If you shine a light on the issues, then the cockroaches start to scatter.
Yeah,
Sure.
For
And I've seen it happen in small areas in the VA. Like when that manager left, after I came back, she left. I stayed for about 6 more months before I left. It became like a whole different facility, that in the ICU, because she was gone. Everyone realized she wasn't doing her job. She was beating people up. She was hiding information. She was doing all these other things. So as soon as she left, man, it was a whole new thing. So I think 6 months with someone like Elon involved, where they can bring in a new charting system. You have to be willing to shed light on it, and you have to be willing to do the hard thing. It's anything in leadership, I mean, what happens when there's a bad SEAL team or whatever? You got to come in and
It's never happened.
Right, ever, right?
It's perfection.
Exactly.
Defined.
Now, especially, I think that's what I hear now is supposed to be. I hear now guys are like so thrilled to be in the
God.
in
I mean,
SEALs right now.
honestly, a lot of the times with leadership issues, what would happen is it would get kicked down the road.
Yeah,
You'd
exactly.
kick the can. And
Exactly.
because, oh man, let's say an average workup and deployment for a SEAL team, conventional SEAL team, is going to be about 2 years, 18 months training, 6-month deployment. I think on average you get rid of about one guy during that time period.
Yeah.
And I am not joking. The stack of paper is about that whole.
Yeah.
It's fucking work.
Oh yeah.
So the easier, not the easier, and easier choice is let's laterally move this guy. Let's let somebody else deal with this. Problem is that nobody really deals with it.
Yeah.
And then certain people achieve a rank where they have a lot more influence, and then you got a fucking problem on your hands.
Exactly.
Not always the case, but yeah.
And then how much does that one person damage the whole unit? The
can be wild. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I've worked for, and I have probably been a fucking bad leader too. Probably put that out there as well. But I've worked for bad leaders and experienced that when that person is removed, and it's like a rope that was around your lungs preventing you from taking a full breath is gone, and for the first time, people are collaborative.
Exactly.
And they're communicating, and instantly things are better. That one person in that key position can be so impactful. I don't understand where we drifted away from standards being the key metric.
It's when you start bringing in all these policies on race and religion and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it doesn't, you know what I mean? It's standard. You have to have standards and accountability or people suffer.
Well, I can understand. I understand the conversations in an academic, non-operational, pun not intended setting. But I mean, if you were to go talk to somebody and legitimately say, hey, you have a brain tumor. This surgery is complicated and it's risky. You personally have to make this choice. Do you want the most qualified and capable person to do this?
Exactly.
Or do you want this person who was not necessarily hired based on those same standards? I don't really think that when push comes to shove, when people's toes are up on the line, I don't really think anybody's going for anything other than the standards and the track record and the objective proof.
Exactly. I mean, that would be my answer. I think it's the same in the SEALs community. Is you have to have standards, and you have to hold people accountable, and you have to be willing to shed light on the issues. At that kind of high level operation, for the hospital and medical would be the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, or the entire unit suffers. And at the end of the day, for me, like in a VA hospital, the veterans suffer. And I mean, they suffer miserable fates because of that. And then you have special interest groups that actually protect the system and not the patient, and it's disgusting. So I honestly think it's just, you got to be willing to do the hard stuff and get your hands dirty. And someone's got to be willing to step up and say, all right, enough's enough. And we're going to suffer a little bit, and there's going to be bad press, and the news is going to call us racist and whatever they're going to say. Let them do it, but we're going to fix the system, because at the end of the day, that's what's best for veterans. That's how I feel about it. Like, you just got to get in there and get it done.
Yeah, man.
So,
what else you want to leave people with? Been out for almost 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I was working with Hook and Veterans. They're a good organization to look into. The stars of that group that I really discovered was actually through Menect.
Yeah.
I learned more in dealing with Menect than I learned how to do an elevator pitch. I got a hold of you through Menect. Mm-hmm. I got a hold of Patrick Bet David because I had his wife watch the Hook and Veterans video.
Yeah, it's a great video.
And then I told her to show it to him because he wasn't answering me, and then he gave me your information. So, the original plan was to get those guys on a podcast. They couldn't come at the time, and then you asked me because I had worked at the VA.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that worked. But yeah, I mean, you can look into them, donate. They have the guy that did their video, his name is Mike Harris. He's with Menect. He's actually the PBD show's main videographer. The dude's an absolute stud. So if you're on Menect, I highly recommend Menect too. I mean, I think it
for people who don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How would you describe it? It's an app that.
I mean, it's professionals. Like I would say high level, not always, but.
But what would you just? You basically can book a short period of their time.
Yeah, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I think it costs like maybe. Everyone, sets their own price, but it costs maybe $200 to have a 15-minute conversation with somebody.
Assuming the software works.
What's that?
Assuming the software works.
Yes, yeah. That's a whole nother issue.
We might have ended up FaceTiming.
Yeah, but hey, I have your personal number. I'm gonna call you all the time.
I don't care. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I think it's to be able to talk to some high-level people that are succeeding in their industry, especially coming out of business school. It's invaluable. It perfected not that I'm perfect at it, but it really helped my elevator pitch. It helped, that's how I'm on this podcast. Those guys are on, the Hook and Veterans guys are on Michael Franchi's podcast in a couple weeks.
And I'll have them on.
All from that. Yeah, that's up to,
the scheduling just didn't line up and yours did.
And I'm not that's on them and you. That's what I like about consulting now is hey, I helped you. Now I'm out of there. See ya.
I think the growth phase is the most fun.
Yeah.
The institutional phase is when people start brushing their teeth with a 6-shooter.
Yeah. And that's when, I'm sure you feel this. That's when you're like, bye.
Oh, man. First off, nobody consults with me on that stuff. I know how to do very few things well, and most of them are completely irrelevant. Like, I can test gravity pretty good.
No,
it's a fucking skill set that doesn't.
I've listened to you on some podcasts, and actually, you gave Jack Carr information that I saw, like a little clip that was really helpful to me.
What, I tell him to stop being gay?
No, close. You basically told him like to just learn to not over involve yourself.
Dude, you got to say no.
Exactly.
Subtraction is more powerful than addition.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good for me to hear and be like, you know what, it's okay to walk away, and it's okay.
I needed to hear that this hunting season, because anytime somebody says to me, hey, do you want to come kill something? I'm like, yes. And then I pull up my calendar. I'm like, well, I guess I'll be visiting my home in Q4. And every year I tell myself the same thing.
Yeah.
I have to back it off. In 2025, I'm going to try to live up to my own advice to other people. There's so many, I enjoy the stuff that I do, so it's hard to say no.
Yeah.
But I've got to start saying no.
My hunting team, I just want to make you proud, is called Squeal Team 6. So
Squeal Team 6?
Squeal Team 6, yeah. Bringing home the bacon is the back of it. So yeah,
I'm game with that.
It's pig hunting. So yeah, I just want to make you proud. All that effort.
There's a lot of Team 6s out there. There's Meal Team 6.
Yeah.
There's Gravy Team 6.
Well, they were going to market it, and I said, I did business school. Let me look this up, and there was a ton of it. We weren't the first guys to come up with the idea. So
I mean, there's
a bunch of 50-year-old guys falling over their e-bikes,
and there's better.
It's fun.
The SEAL thing, I'm hoping. I hate to say this because some people will hate it. I'm hoping that the star has reached its apex. It'd be better if the community went a little bit more back behind the shadows. And I say that as somebody that I know damn well, that I use my experience in the SEAL community, and it frames the lens that I view the world, but it's not the end all be all. It's just a job.
One thing I appreciate, it's like your podcast, that I do think the SEAL community, the more I've thought about it and watched a lot of these, because I know, I dated a girl for a while that was really, her dad's best friend was a Delta guy.
Okay.
And he was a pretty high level Delta guy. One of those Delta guys you never hear about. But I can tell you after. But so he's got a real ethos about all that. I actually think a lot of the SEAL community and the Delta Force talking right now has been good for people, because it's shedding light on a lot of things that happen behind the scenes that the government just wants to hide. And I think people should have those conversations. Yeah. You know what I mean? On, is this right? Are we always the good guys? Should we always make these decisions? And is it right to tell guys to go do that and then shut their mouths because we have an ethos? So I think some of that's good, but I know what you're saying too. Like, it's okay. It'll
serve the community better a little bit if they were to go 1 foot back behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Which I have no control over. And again, people are free to do with what they want to with their experiences. Yeah. I try to tread on it lightly, but it is what it is at the same time.
No, I hear you. Yeah.
What do you want to close it out with?
That's it. I'm making the rounds. I'm doing my own thing, trying to do the consulting and develop an app. Anybody wants to, we're trying to raise money for it. I got really good advice.
What's an app cost?
Well, if we do it through insurance companies, I think it'll be about $200,000 to $300,000. I just talked to
build it.
Yeah, a high level app developer that told me, you have a good idea, and he saved me. I love the guy. He said, "Are you going to spend all your savings?" I said, "Yeah." How'd you know that? He said, "Don't do it. If it's a good idea, raise the money, give up 30%, and wait." So I'm super thankful for that. So now I'm just kind of sitting back. We're approaching some insurance companies soon about it. I'm kind of hoping they'll fund it, which I think is likely, because I think the idea is decent enough. That we'll see how it goes. But
do you play in the social media world at all, or do you have any interest in putting anything out there where people can get in touch with you if they want to?
No, I should start to. I'm on LinkedIn. That's it. I stopped Facebook, Instagram. I never had any of that. If I make the rounds, I may do that. I've thought about down the road, especially with my background, opening a wellness center with some of the off-brand meds, because I've learned a lot about that. So I may start to do that down the road. This kind of came out of nowhere. I was really trying to get the other guys on. You asked me to come on, and I just decided, I think it's a good idea to talk about the VA.
I was going to say, well, there was that conversation bifurcated quickly. I'm like, yes, the hook a hero thing is awesome, but also let's have a little chat about your experience in the VA.
I actually think in the big picture, it's good.
Both are great conversations.
Shed light on it.
It would have been hard to actually have a collaborative conversation with them here and you at the same time.
Yeah, impossible. No, I think it would have been funky, or it would have just been. We would have been the weave. We would have been weaving the whole time. Never got anywhere.
Worst description ever. The weave.
Yeah. It's not a healthy way to communicate, for sure.
No. Well, cool, man. Let's get you off to for people out there listening. Steakhouse, Kalispell, the Mercantile. Let's get you over there.
Mercantile, absolutely.
Cool, man.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
All
it.
Right, thank you.
Yep.